Hi guys. Tonight, we step out into the brittle silence of a winter forest. Snow piling against your boots and the air so sharp it cuts your lungs with every inhale. The trees loom around you, skeletal in their icy coats, and the moon throws silver light across a landscape that feels both serene and deadly. It's beautiful, yes, but you probably won't survive this. You'd freeze long before dawn without the kind of wisdom native peoples carried for generations. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know what's your location and what time is it where you're listening right now. Drop that in the comments. It's always fascinating to see this little community stretch across the globe. Now dim the lights and let's begin. You're trudging deeper into the dark, hearing the faint groan of trees bending under their icy burden. Imagine yourself alone in this wilderness. No polyester fleece, no fancy sleeping bag. Just your body determination and the biting chill. You feel the panic creeping in because the temperature plummets with every passing hour, and you wonder how anyone could ever have slept peacefully out here. Yet, Native Americans did century after century in regions where temperatures regularly dipped below zero. They didn't just survive, they rested, dreamed, and woke, ready for another day. The first thing you notice is fire. Always fire. A small, crackling flame and the clearing becomes the center of life. Historically, indigenous peoples from the Great Plains to the Subarctic relied on fire not only for cooking, but as a literal hearth, a micro-sun, creating a circle of safety in the otherwise frozen night. A mainstream historical fact is that some tribes like the Cree or Ojibwe structured entire camp layouts around fire, placing families so everyone had equal access to warmth. Fire wasn't a luxury, it was architecture. But there's a quirky tidbit that might make you smile. The smell of smoke wasn't just tolerated, it was loved. Sleeping in smoky air meant fewer mosquitoes in the summer, and in winter, that smoky haze clung to clothes, masks, and bedding, acting as a natural bug repellent long before chemical sprays. You lying there under furs would actually be grateful for the sting in your eyes. Without it, pests and illness crept in. It's not the sparoma you might prefer, but it did the trick. As you inch closer to the flames, you realize warmth alone is not enough. Heat has to be managed. Too much, and you risk sparks catching your bedding. Too little, and your toes start to stiffen. Families solve this with rotations. Who tended the fire? Who fetched more wood? Who shifted embers? That watchful rhythm kept nights alive. Historians still argue whether fire tending was strictly a communal duty passed between family members equally, or if it was assigned to specific individuals who specialized in managing flame. The truth may vary by region, but the debate itself shows just how central fire was to surviving cold nights. Now imagine the sounds. The hiss of snow melting when it falls into the flames. The pop of sap exploding in firewood. The soft shuffle of someone rising in the night to add another log. You stir under a robe. The smell of hides mingling with smoke, and the gentle murmur of a lullaby sung by a mother to keep children calm. The wilderness is silent beyond your circle, but inside, the fire has a heartbeat. You reflect on how dependent you are on matches, or lighters, in modern life. Here, fire came from skill sparks, coaxed from flint, embers carried in bark containers when moving camp, or fire drills spun with patient hands until smoke curled upward. The effort made every flame precious. You wouldn't waste it. You'd treasure it. Sleep could never be careless when the cold waited just beyond the edge of light. And there's a moment as you drift off beside that fire when you realize how the mind adapts. You stop thinking of the cold as an enemy and start seeing it as part of the rhythm. The ache in your fingers, the steam of your breath, the glow of embers. These become the lullabies of the wilderness. The fire doesn't chase away the cold completely. It teaches you how to balance with it. Too live with Italiano, your eyelids droop. Your body curls tighter under skins, and the crackle continues. You're safe enough for tonight, in a fragile circle of heat that countless generations mastered. And before you slide deeper into sleep, one last thought flickers. If you ever found yourself here without that fire, without that knowledge, the night would swallow you whole. But the story is just beginning. The fire is only the first secret. The next is how layers of hides themselves could mimic the warmth of a modern sleeping bag. You feel that tug of curiosity even as the flames dance behind your eyes. You stir awake in that dim glow. The fire still alive but smoldering low. Embers whispering their orange secrets under the ash. The cold has crept back in, brushing your cheeks like an unwelcome guest. And you reach instinctively for the second defense layers. Not the kind of quilted jackets or high-tech fleece you know today, but the ingenious arrangement of animal skins, each layer trapping air, each layer fold, conserving the faintest bit of warmth your body can generate. A mainstream historical fact is that indigenous groups across North America use multiple hides stacked together to form what we might casually call a prehistoric sleeping bag. Deer, elk, moose, and caribou hides were soft and treated until they were supple, then overlapped in such a way that each layer overlapped seams in the one beneath it. This simple principle, staggering the gaps, meant no icy wind could find a way in. Imagine yourself burrowing into that bundle, pulling one layer over your shoulders, tucking another under your knees until you're nestled in a cocoon of fur and leather. There's a quirky tidbit that might catch you off guard. These hides didn't always stay fresh, smelling. Without the conveniences of dry cleaners or laundry detergent, bedding could retain earthy, musky odor, part animal, part smoke, part human. But here's the strange part. Those smells weren't unpleasant to the people who lived with them daily. In fact, they signaled safety. To them, the musk of hides meant home, a warm enclosure, the promise of survival. You might wrinkle your nose at it, but in that frozen wilderness, you'd quickly learn to associate those smells with comfort rather than discomfort. As you tug the fur tighter around yourself, the tactile sensation strikes you. The outer side, leather smoothed, resists snowflakes, so they slide off like rain from waxed canvas. The inner side, the fur, presses against your skin with an irregular scratchy softness. You can feel the individual hairs, some coarse, some fine, all insulating you from the air outside. You hear the faint rasp of fur against fur as you shift, a sound so ancient it might as well be the lullaby of survival itself. And you notice something else. Air is the real secret. It's not the hide alone, but the way hides trap little pockets of air between layers. That captured air becomes an invisible quilt and your own body heat fills it. The science is simple, yet it's the same principle used in every modern down jacket or thermal blanket. What you buy for hundreds of dollars at an outdoor store is essentially a continuation of what indigenous peoples perfected thousands of years ago. Historians still puzzle over whether all tribes treated their hides equally well. Some evidence suggests that Arctic groups developed more advanced tanning processes that removed grease and toughened the leather, while others may have relied on cruder methods, resulting in stiffer, heavier bedding. The debate lingers because hides decay quickly when unearthed, leaving us only faint impressions of stitching or remnants of fur. But even with limited evidence, the consensus remains that layering was universal. Everyone understood that one skin was never enough when the world outside could kill you with its cold breath. Now imagine the nighttime routine. Before lying down, you'd spread one or two hides on the frozen ground, insulating yourself from below. Then you'd pull several more over your body, tucking the edges tight, pressing them down with stones or other hides so no draft could sneak in. If you shared the bedding with family, you'd overlap yourselves as carefully as the hides your sister's shoulder pressed against yours, your child's back tucked against your belly. The layers of hides and layers of human bodies blurred together, creating a collective fortress against frost. And while you might be tempted to think of these furs as crude or unsanitary, there's an they were portable. Roll them up, sling them over a frame, and carry them to the next camp. The hides doubled as cloaks in the day, bedding at night, sometimes even tents when strung together. Multi-purpose, durable, and vital. They embodied the minimalist genius of people who could not afford wasted effort. The soundscape lulls you again. The faint creak of hide as it flexes when you move. The soft brushing of fur as you roll from side to side. Beneath you, the layered skins keep the ground's icy bite at bay. while above you, the weight of more hides feels protective, almost warm-like. You breathe in, and the smell of smoke from last night's fire still clings to the fur, layering scent on top of warmth. You reflect on your own bedroom, the neat sheets and blankets, and you realize how distant that world is from this one. Yet strangely, as you lie inside these hides, you feel just as snug, maybe even more so, because the contrast between the deadly cold outside and the fragile warmth inside makes every degree of heat feel like a miracle. Before you drift again, you smile at the idea that these hides, simple, rough smelling of earth, were the reason countless generations awoke in the morning instead of turning into ice. And you understand that while fire was the visible heart of survival, hides were the silent shield, the blanket of life wrapped around entire nations through centuries of long, cold nights. The embers are fading, but you are swaddled, secure, drifting again. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll learn how entire buffalo hides became more than bedding. They became communal quilts, heavy and warm enough to keep whole families alive at once. The fire has dwindled to a whisper now, just the soft, red glow beneath a crust of ash, and you burrow deeper into your cocoon of hides. But then you notice something even cleverer at play. These aren't just hides tossed over you haphazardly. They've been layered with intent, tucked and overlapped, forming a system far older than the sleeping bags hanging on shelves at your local camping store. A mainstream historical fact is that native peoples perfected this method of layering multiple animal skins, often arranging them like shingles on a roof, with the fur sides alternating fur against skin for warmth, leather outward for weather resistance. Archaeologists have noted this layering effect, particularly among subarctic groups, where survival demanded that not a single breeze slip through. In essence, you are lying in a carefully engineered envelope of insulation. But here's a quirky tidbit that might surprise you. Grease, the very thing you'd normally scrub off, was sometimes left in the hides deliberately. A slightly greasy hide became more waterproof, better at shedding snow or freezing rain. Imagine lying there wrapped in skins that smelled faintly of tallow, slick to the touch, but keeping you from waking up with frozen moisture clinging to your body. To you, in your modern sensibilities, it might feel messy. To them, it was clever chemistry. The sensory details around you, the rough stitching made of sinew, scratching faintly against your wrist. They soft, crackle as frozen hair tips snap when pressed. The warm cushion of trapped air that slowly makes the cocoon feel less like a bundle of dead animals and more like an extension of your own skin. Each hide breathes, expands slightly with warmth, contracts with the cold, and together they pulse like a living thing, keeping you safe. You try shifting, curling onto your side, and realize how these layers hold together even without modern fasteners. Weight is the job. Some families pressed stones along the edges to prevent gaps. Others tucked hides under their bodies so no frost could crawl in from beneath. And when one layer wore thin, another was added on top. An ongoing cycle of patching, warmth against the inevitable creep of winter. Historians still question whether layering was more standardized in nomadic cultures versus settled ones. Did a plains hunter pack 3 hides by default? Did a family in the forests always keep spares just for sleeping? The written accounts are scattered, filtered through the eyes of European observers, who often failed to appreciate the subtleties. What is clear, though, is that layering was not improvisation. It was routine, ritual, and refined knowledge passed from elder to child like a secret recipe. And now, picture the scene not as a single sleeper, but as a family group. The mother ensures her youngest child is wrapped first, snug between 2 hides. Older siblings curl around that bundle, each tugging their share of skins over shoulders. Parents on the outer edges brace against the drafts, their broader bodies forming the barrier. The hides layered over bodies mirror the bodies layered over earth. Everyone becomes part of one larger living quilt. The sounds of the night change depending on your position. Near AG, you might hear the moan of wind pressing against bark walls or hide tenting. Deeper inside, it's muffled, just the steady breaths of those around you. The occasional cough, the shuffle as someone adjusts to their bedding. Above it all, the silence of snow continues, heavy, relentless, but kept outside by overlapping skins. Guard you like armor. Reflect on your modern blanket. Thin, colorful, easily washed. It carries no story. Yet here, each hide is a history. That deer was hunted by your uncle. That moose fell in a river chase. That elk provided not only warmth, but tools, meat, and sinew. You are literally covered in the memory of hunts and the bounty of your people's relationship with the land. Each layer is not just physical insulation, it's cultural continuity, pressed close against your heartbeat. And perhaps there's even a touch of vanity. Some hides were decorated, smoked to rich colors, or trimmed with fringe. You're lying there in survival gear, yes, but also in art. It's not just functional, it's personal, expressive, a reminder that humans always find beauty, even when fighting the cold. As you close your eyes again, you realize the brilliance of it all. It wasn't fire alone or hides alone, but the combination fire created heat, and layered hides trapped it, stretched every flicker into hours of rest. And so you drift into slumber, knowing that without these overlapping skins, you'd wake stiff and blue. Instead, you wake alive, and when you do, you'll notice something new. The buffalo robes. They once draped entire families, blankets so massive and communal that they carried the very essence of warmth across generations. You wake before dawn, the fire just a faint shimmer, and the hides heavy with frost along their edges. The air is sharp enough to make your nostrils ache. But then you notice something extraordinary draped across the family. Enormous buffalo robes, thick and wide, covering not just one sleeper, but several at once. These weren't just blankets. They were survival masterpieces. One detail historians generally agree on is that plains, tribes, prized buffalo hides more than almost any other resource. A single robe could measure well over 6 feet in length, sometimes stretching even further when taken from a massive bull, tanned and softened carefully with the thick winter fur left intact. These robes became the ultimate cold weather protection. You picture yourself beneath one now. The fur dense as a mattress, the leather underside strong enough to block wind. It's not just a cover, it's an environment. But RS, a curious note, some buffalo robes were so heavy that it took effort just to shift under them. Early European observers wrote of the sensation as though one were pinned by the weight of an animal itself. And yet that heaviness was a blessing. The pressure trapped heat, pressed bodies together, and created a sense of immovable safety. You might grumble about the weight at first, but after a few minutes, the sheer density becomes reassuring, as if the earth itself has wrapped you in a protective embrace. You can almost feel it, the way the robe drapes unevenly, its edges thick, its fur smelling faintly of smoke and musk. It's not refined like a quilt. It's raw, alive with texture. Run your fingers through the pile, and you feel tufts that catch at your skin, rougher than sheep's wool, but infinitely warmer. Beneath its weight, your body stops shivering. Accounts from the 18th and 19th centuries mention buffalo robes, serving not just as bedding, but as trade goods of immense value. A robe could buy tools, horses, or food from neighboring tribes or arriving traders. So when you're lying there at night under one, you're wrapped, not just in warmth, but in wealth. Your family might have secured it through a long hunt, or perhaps through exchange with another band. Either way, it symbolizes survival in more than one sense. Archaeologists continue to debate whether the robes were primarily individual items or designed for communal sharing. Some sources describe single sleepers clutching their own robe, while others depict families huddling beneath one giant covering. The evidence is patchy, and no single answer fits all contexts. Still, as you lie here imagining the scene, the communal version feels most natural. After all, warmth in the wilderness is not a solo pursuit. It is shared, passed along like fire itself. There's also a ritual dimension you can't ignore. Certain robes were decorated with painted scenes, hunts, visions, symbols of spiritual journeys. Picture drifting to sleep under a hide inscribed with the story of your ancestors. The images glowing faintly by firelight. The warmth is physical, yes, but the designs remind you of identity, belonging, continuity. Every night becomes both a practical act of survival and a quiet communion with heritage. Think about the daily routine of preparing such bedding. In the evening, the robe might be unrolled carefully, shaken to rid it of clinging frost, then spread on the ground or over other hides. The family arranges themselves beneath it, adjusting positions so the edges overlap and no icy air sneaks through. In the morning, once the fire is rekindled, the robe is rolled up again, strapped to a travois, and carried to the next camp. Its portability made nomadic life possible. Yes, it was heavy, but in a life of constant movement, even heavy things had to be mobile. You wonder about the sensory world under that robe. The heat builds slowly as bodies press together, and soon you hear the muffled breathing of those around you. The fur rustles faintly when someone shifts, and you catch whiffs of charred wood smoke mingled with animal scent. The world outside may howl with wind and snow, but inside this shared cave of buffalo hide, the storm feels distant. You're encased in silence, in weight, in warmth, and here's an odd cultural footnote. Buffalo robes sometimes doubled as makeshift sleds. In emergencies, people could pile belongings into a robe, tie it into a bundle, and drag it across the snow. So that same hide that kept you alive at night might also carry your tools, your food, or even your children the next day. Every part of it was useful. Nothing wasted, nothing merely decorative. Still, not every robe was equal. Some were tanned meticulously, softened with brain mixtures until supple and pliant, while others remained stiff, hard to fold, and less comfortable for sleeping. Specialists within tribes often handled tanning, passing the knowledge down like sacred law. The subtlety of these processes is still something scholars try to piece together. Was brain tanning universal? Did every group apply smoke curing? The answers vary across time and place, reminding you that even the buffalo robe, seemingly straightforward, was part of a sophisticated web of knowledge. You shift again, adjusting to the robe's immensity, and realize how it shaped social life. Imagine 5 or 6 people lying side by side, pressed close, not because they want to, but because the robe demands it. Children between parents, siblings lined up, elders near the fire's edge. Privacy dissolves, replaced by shared survival. Every night became a reminder of interdependence. Alone, you froze. Together, under the robe, you endured. There's even something psychological at play. The robe's weight anchors you, making rest deeper, steadier. It's what modern sleep researchers call pressure therapy. The same principle as weighted blankets. You, centuries later, curl under a mass-reduced, weighted throw to ease anxiety. While here, indigenous peoples discovered the same calming effect with a buffalo hide. The science of comfort discovered long before anyone thought to name it. As you drift in this imagined slumber, you reflect on the costs of such warmth. A buffalo had to be hunted, skinned, processed. Entire communities worked together to transform the raw material into a life-saving robe. And with colonization and the mass slaughter of buffalo in the 19th century, those robes became scarcer, more precious until whole lifeways unraveled. You sense the fragility of the world you're lying in, how much depended on those massive herds roaming freely across plains. For now, though, you are safe, wrapped in fur, thick as a mattress, heavy as stone, yet soft enough to breathe through. Your body heat radiates into the layers, mingles with the warmth of your companions, and together you form a small sun, burning against the winter's endless night. And in the fading haze before sleep, you know another lesson waits. Because sometimes, survival meant not resisting the snow, but embracing it, digging into drifts, carving shelters where frost itself became protection. That will be your next discovery. The buffalo robe still drapes across you like a fortress, but when you stir awake, the fire is gone, only faint smoke curling into the pre-dawn sky. The cold rushes back in, sharper than a blade, and you realize that hides alone aren't always enough. In the vast sweep of the northern forests or the windswept plains, Native Americans often turned not away from snow, but directly into it. Snow itself became the shield. What we know for certain is that digging into snow wasn't desperation. It was strategy, by carving out a hollow within a deep drift, or Piling snow into a mound and tunneling inside, families could create a natural igloo of sorts, though not always in the same rounded shape you might picture from the Arctic. Snow has insulating properties that surprise most people, though it feels frigid on your bare skin. A packed shelter traps air, dampens wind, and raises interior temperatures significantly. It might be 20 below outside, yet inside the snow cave, it could hover just below freezing, a shocking improvement when survival is measured in degrees. Here's a little-known twist. Snow shelters didn't just protect from cold. They also muted sound. Imagine lying there in the hollow, the walls thick and white. And suddenly, the howling wind is hushed, distant, muffled as if you've stepped into a padded chamber. Children fell asleep more easily in that muffled silence. Mothers rested without the constant worry of creaking branches above. In a way, the snow turned from an enemy into a lullaby. The experience is tactile, too. You crawl inside on your knees. The passage narrow, your palms pressing against the cool crust, your breath condensing instantly into crystals that sparkle faintly on the inner walls. The floor, lined quickly with branches or hides, feels softer than raw earth. Above you, the curved ceiling seems to glow faintly, catching ambient moonlight and turning it into a strange bluish haze. It's eerie at first, but after a while, the glow feels comforting. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence that some tribes regularly built such shelters. In emergencies, especially hunters caught far from camp, they scooped out snow pits just large enough for a single body, covered them with brush and hides, and survived nights that otherwise would have been deadly. Scholars remain divided on how often entire families slept in these snow constructions versus using them only for temporary hunting expeditions. Written accounts from early explorers describe both practices, but the details blur between observation and assumption. Picture the ritual of making one. First, you find a drift tall enough to hollow. Then, you carve an entrance tunnel that bends upward slightly, preventing wind from blasting inside. Next, you smooth the interior walls so no dripping occurs because a single drop of meltwater could turn comfort into misery. Finally, you lay branches or even your spare robe beneath you, insulating from the frozen floor. When all is done, you slip inside with your family. Block the entrance with a slab of snow or hide and listen as silence replaces the blizzard. And here's something unexpected. Smoke holes weren't always cut. In the smallest shelters, a fire wasn't practical, so warmth came only from body heat. Your own breath would frost the ceiling, creating sparkling patterns by morning. In larger constructions, however, small fires were possible, carefully managed so that smoke drifted out through thin points in the roof. The idea of fire inside snow feels absurd until you realize how well the ice reflects heat without instantly melting. You shift beneath your robe, imagining what it felt like to share one of these dens. With a group pressed shoulder-tosh, shoulder knees curled, bodies layered like logs, you'd hear muffled coughs, whispers, maybe the giggle of a child who found it amusing to be inside the snow itself. Outside the storm raged, but inside warmth built slowly, each exhale adding to the invisible reservoir of heat, and the cultural meaning lingers, too. Oral histories describe snow shelters as symbols of adaptability, proof that even the harshest environment could be turned into an ally. Sleeping inside the very substance that threatened to kill you was a reminder of humility. You couldn't conquer nature, but you could learn to bend with it. The smell, oddly enough, would be faint, less of smoke, more of frost. That crisp mineral temps of frozen air. In your hair, crystals form where moisture has escaped. And when you stir awake, the interior glitters with 1,000 pinpoints of light. For a moment, it feels like sleeping inside a star. And there's another quirky observation from early missionaries. Children sometimes treated snow shelters as playhouses, tumbling in and out of the tunnels during daylight. What was for adults a matter of life and death could, for the young, become an adventure. Laughter echoed in those caves, softening the memory of hardship. From a modern perspective, you marvel at the brilliance. Survival manuals today still teach similar methods. Dig trench, build a snow cave, block the entrance. All those techniques are echoes of indigenous ingenuity. They remind you that sleeping bags and tents are not inventions of the present, but refinements of knowledge already tested by countless generations. So, as you stretch inside your imagined snow cave, you realize how strange an island. You're not shivering anymore. Your body has adjusted. The snow is doing its work, and the storm above is just a faint roar in the distance. You close your eyes and think of the paradox snow which you once cursed for its killing cold now protects you like a womb. And as you drift, one thought lingers. Not every night was spent inside snow. Of course, sometimes survival came from more ordinary materials. Branches, bark, lean, hastily raised to stop the wind. That will be your next lesson when you step back into the forest and watch shelter rise from the simplest scraps of nature. You crawl out of that snow cave, the early light cutting across drifts, your breath curling in the air like smoke. The world feels raw and exposed again, and you sense the danger creeping back in. You realize snow alone can't always be trusted. Too shallow, too wet, or simply non-existent in some regions. In those moments, Native Americans leaned on another ancient defense. Leontus made from brush, bark, and whatever the forest could spare. There's no question that bark shelters were among the most practical inventions in wooded areas. Strips of birch, elm, or spruce bark could be cut, peeled, and leisured, form a wall that turned icy wind aside. The frame itself was simple, poles lashed together in a triangular or half-dome shape, then covered with bark sheets or piled branches. In a matter of hours, you could build a sturdy sleeping place that cut the chill dramatically. The forest gave its skin, and in return it sheltered you. Here's an odd detail. Bark once dried, often curled at the edges. Instead of discarding those awkward pieces, families tucked them carefully into gaps, wedging and overlapping until the walls looked like scales. The result wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Drafts struggled to find a way through. From inside, the patchwork pattern caught firelight in odd ways, flickering shadows that seemed almost alive. Imagine lying down beneath such a wall, seeing the dance of orange and black across the ridges, and feeling safer than you had minutes earlier. You can hear the sounds as it comes together. The creak of poles forced into the ground, the snap of branches trimmed to size, the dry rasp of bark dragged across the snow. Each sound is a promise, a roof, a wall, a break from the cold. When the shelter finally takes form, you sit inside, the silence returning, and the difference is immediate. Wind hisses outside, but within it's muffled, the air calm enough for a fire to be lit without constant flicker. Archaeological findings suggest that in the northeast woodlands, entire communities sometimes slept in bark longhouses, large enough to fit dozens. Smaller leantos, however, remained essential for travelers, hunters, and temporary encampments. Scholars continue to wonder whether these shelters were always considered temporary, or if in some seasons they became semi-permanent homes. The debate lingers, fueled by the lack of surviving bark structures. They rot quickly, leaving little evidence. Yet, oral accounts tell us they were central to survival strategies year after year. Now picture the intimate details of preparing one for sleep. First, evergreen boughs laid thick across the floor. Their scent, rhinous, sharp, comforting, fills your nose as you kneel to arrange them. Then hides are spread atop that green mattress, softening the prick of needles. The fire outside is drawn just close enough that its heat seeps through the open front of the lentu, while smoke curls upward and away. Inside, you curl against another sleeper, the bark wall at your back, radiating the faint warmth it has absorbed. Something amusing lingers in. The memory of early observers. They often complained of fleas from bedding made of brush and bark. It turns out the occasional insect hitchhiked in with the evergreen branches, creating less than ideal company for the night. You imagine scratching irritably in the darkness, yet deciding it's a small price to pay for not freezing to death. Better a flea or two than the bite of frost. The textures comfort you. The bark wall is rough beneath your palm, flaky in places, solid in others. The floor crackles softly as you shift your weight, the evergreen needles releasing fresh bursts of scent. Overhead, the structure groans faintly when wind presses against it, but it holds, resilient, bending rather than breaking. You close your eyes, lulled by the chorus of creaks and sighs, and there is Another layer ritual. Some tribes treated the act of building even a temporary lean-to as more than necessity. Songs were sung during construction, chants whispered to honor the trees that had given bark and branches. Sleeping inside became not only physical shelter but spiritual alignment, a reminder of harmony with the forest. In those beliefs, a lean-to wasn't just wood and bark, it was kinship, part of the same living world that you belonged to. Modern campers try to replicate the method, cutting branches, stacking bark, laying evergreen mats. Survival manuals echo instructions native peoples knew by heart. Yet something is missing: the patience, the rhythm, the inherited knowledge of exactly which bark peels best, which branch bends without snapping, which evergreen needles smell sweetest as they warm beneath you. That intimacy with the land made each lean to more than a structure. It was art, born of necessity. The debate among historians touches another point. Did families sleep with the open side always facing fire? Or did they rotate depending on wind direction? Some evidence suggests flexibility, an intuitive understanding of microclimates, adjusting orientation nightly. It wasn't a rigid formula, but a constant negotiation with weather. You sensed that adaptability was as important as construction. Knowing how to build mattered. Knowing how to adjust mattered more. And so, you lie there in your imagined lean-to bark wall at your back, fire glow on your face. The night grows colder, yet inside you feel protected, enveloped by the forest's generosity. It isn't luxurious. Fleas, smoke, and cramped space remind you of that. But it is enough. Enough to carry you through until morning, when light filters through cracks in the bark, and you wake to a world still frozen yet survivable. As your eyes grow heavy, you can almost taste the resin in the air, the bitterness of smoke lingering on your tongue. Outside, snow crunches faintly under someone's step. Perhaps a night watch returning with more wood. You drift between waking and sleep, comforted by the thought that the forest has built you a blanket of its own. And you know this: lientos were not the only clever shelter. Beneath your feet lies another secret, one carved into the earth itself. Pits dug deep, chambers hidden underground, where warmth was trapped, not by bark or snow, but by soil, that you sense will be the next step in your journey. You leave behind the bark, lean to its rhinous smell still clinging to your skin, and step onto ground that feels unyielding beneath the snow. You stamp your boots, hearing the hollow echo of frozen soil, and it dawns on you that sometimes warmth wasn't sought above the surface at all. Instead, native peoples dug down, creating underground pits where heat stayed trapped like a hidden treasure. Archaeological evidence shows that in many regions, especially in the northwest and parts of the suburb, families carved semi-upturned houses that offered remarkable insulation. Imagine walking across a winter plain and seeing only a faint rise of earth, a chimney of smoke, maybe the top of a roof covered in sod. Beneath it, however, a chamber stretched out, lined with poles, mats, and hides. The earth itself became a wall, steady and thick, protecting sleepers from wind and frost. And here's a detail that might surprise you. Even temporary hunting shelters sometimes borrowed this idea. A pit just 2 or 3 feet deep could transform the way heat circulated. By stepping down, curling into the earth's belly, you escape the wild swings of air temperature above. Modern campers talk about cold sinks, where air settles into hollows. But for indigenous peoples, pits work differently. When insulated correctly with branches, bark, or hides, the ground cocooned you in a pocket of still air that preserved every degree of warmth your body produced. The process of making one was both labor and ritual. First, scraping frozen soil with bone or antler tools, the earth cracking reluctantly. Next, lining the hollow with mats woven from reeds or with spruce boughs that released their piney scent into the night. Aubertise basse hides were laid, turning dirt into bedding. Then poles formed a roof, angled like ribs, covered with brush, sod, or more hides, leaving a small opening for air and smoke. Crawling inside, you'd feel as if you were entering the chest cavity of some great creature, protected, enclosed, breathing with you. Researchers remain divided on whether these subterranean shelters were primarily winter villages or seasonal retreats. Some evidence suggests year-round use in certain regions, with entire communities dwelling beneath the surface. Other records describe them more as temporary winter refuges, abandoned in summer for lighter portable homes. The truth may be a blend, adaptation shaped by climate, resources, and tradition. Now imagine yourself settling into one of these earthen chambers. The floor beneath you, though hard, radiates a dull steadiness, neither freezing nor burning. Above, smoke curls lazily toward the vent, the walls absorbing its scent until even the soil smells of wood fire. Around you, shadows flicker across packed earth, giving the impression that the ground itself is alive. You lie back, cocooned, and feel a warmth more constant than any lean-to could offer. One curious aspect from oral accounts: children sometimes decorated the walls with finger marks or pressed designs, turning plain dirt into patterns. You can picture little hands dragging across clay, leaving smudges that glowed in firelight like cave art. In the middle of struggle, place or by bead, leaving traces of humanity etched in mud. The acoustics inside such pits were unique. Outside, the wind might roar, trees creak, wolves howl. Inside, the chamber turned every sound soft. Conversations became murmurs. Songs echoed faintly. Lullabies lingered in the corners of the room long after voices ceased. Falling asleep here meant drifting off, not in silence, but in a world gently resonant, like a drum holding the last notes of a beat. And you can't help but think of modern basement, storm shelters, even military bunkers. The logic is the same. The earth insulates. Yet in this indigenous context, it wasn't about concrete or steel, but about trust in soil and stone. People saw the land not only as provider of food, but as a house, a womb, a partner in survival. There's also a sensory richness to recall, the smell of damp clay mingling with wood smoke, the taste of ash in your mouth as fire smolders, the roughness of packed earth beneath your fingertips. Sleep in such a place wasn't luxurious. It was gritty, smoky, heavy, but it was safe. Every exhale seemed to belong to the shelter itself, each breath bouncing back, warming you further. Some accounts mention underground chambers large enough for dozens, a village hidden beneath frost. Picture walking down a tunnel, ducking beneath beams, entering a communal room where fires glowed in multiple pits, families curled on mats around them, the ceiling low, the walls thick, the heat collective. You'd see children sprawled in sleep, elders murmuring in dreams, hunters shifting restlessly before dawn. That subterranean rhythm stitched communities together more tightly than any above-ground home. And there's a practical footnote. These chambers weren't immune to problems. Ventilation was tricky. Without proper airflow, smoke built up, stinging eyes and lungs. Families had to balance heat and breathability, adjusting vents constantly. Some days you might wake coughing, eyes watering yet still grateful for life. Survival rarely felt perfect. It was always a negotiation. Still, compared to the biting cold outside, the pit was paradise. As you curl under your hides in this imagined chamber, you feel the weight of soil overhead, the steady pulse of fire. Nearby, the collective breath of sleepers around you. The world above may be chaos. Storms, ice, predators. But beneath there is calm. The earth has swallowed you, hidden you, and kept you alive. And as drowsiness takes over, you realize this ingenuity didn't end with pits. Another trick awaited in the wilderness. One so simple it almost feels like magic. Stones heated by fire, tucked into bedding, glowing long after flames had died. That'll be your next discovery. A secret of warmth carried through the night. The earth pit fades behind you, its smoky smell clinging faintly to your clothes, and you find yourself once more under the open sky. The stars scatter like ice chips above, and the fire at camp has died into cold gray ash. You shiver, realizing that tonight you have no roaring flames, no robe large enough to cover your whole body, no pit to retreat into. But then you notice something simple lying nearby. Stones still radiating warmth, gathered carefully by someone who knew this trick before you. Archaeological evidence shows that indigenous groups across North America frequently used heated stones as nighttime warmers. The method was elegantly straightforward. Rocks placed in the fire during evening hours absorbed heat, then were wrapped in hides, bark, or woven mats, and carried into bedding, tucked against your feet, your stomach, or even beneath layers of fur. These stones gave off a steady glow of warmth for hours. In essence, they were the prehistoric hot water bottles, the ancestors of every heated pad you've ever used. One curious observation passed down in oral history is that certain tribes were choosy about which stones to use. Not every rock could handle the fire. River stones, for instance, sometimes cracked or even exploded when overheated because of moisture inside. So, people learned to select dense, dry stones from particular places, memorizing which outcrops produced the safest material. This knowledge of rocks, of heat, of fire wasn't accidental. It was inherited, practiced, whispered from elders to youth like a secret formula. You crouch now in the dark, imagining yourself lifting one of those stones. Heat's surface feels rough, edges irregular, but the heat seeps through your hands like an ember held in solid form. You wrap it quickly in a strip of hide before it burns, tuck it under your robe, and suddenly the chill recedes from your core. The sensation is immediate, visceral, like carrying a private sun beneath your blanket. Researchers remain divided on whether heated stones were used mostly by hunters sleeping away from camp or whether they became common even in large village settings. The evidence is hard to trace, since stones leave little behind but soot marks. Still, early accounts from explorers describe them often enough to suggest the practice was widespread, especially in colder climates where fuel for large fires was scarce. Why burn wood all night when you could store its heat in rock and carry it to bed? Think of the sensory details. The smell of singed hide where the stone is pressed too long. The faint crackle as bark wrapping dries around it. The soft hiss when frost on its surface evaporates instantly against your skin. The heat is uneven, intense at first, then mellowing into a gentle radiance. You shift it from one place to another, chasing the last pulses of warmth as they fade slowly into the night. Here's a little quirk that might make you smile. Sometimes people name their favorite stones. A well-shaped rock that held heat reliably became a companion carried from camp to camp. You can picture a grandmother chuckling as she scolds a child for misplacing her stone, treating it not as an object, but as a trusted helper in the nightly battle with frost. Now imagine sharing these heated stones among several sleepers. A parent places one at the foot of a child's bedding, another between two bodies, a third beneath the layered hides covering everyone. The warmth spreads unevenly, pockets of heat blooming here and there, but together they make the night bearable. The rhythm of survival changes. You no longer dread the fire dying because its energy lingers in these silent companions tucked close. And of course there was danger. Stones too hot could burn hides or skin. Some cracked violently, scattering sparks in the dark. To prevent this, families developed careful rituals, testing stones before wrapping, cooling them briefly in air, or layering multiple cloths around them. It was a balancing act, one that demanded attention, even in exhaustion. Survival never gave gifts freely. It always asked for vigilance. The psychological comfort mattered almost as much as the physical. Imagine a child clutching a warm stone in the dark, feeling less alone because of its steady presence. Even adults might have slept more soundly, cradled by the illusion of holding fire itself in their arms. That reassurance is timeless. You can still feel it today when you slide under a weighted, heated blanket and let your body finally relax. There's also a spiritual undertone to consider. In many native traditions, stones were not lifeless objects, but ancient beings, keepers of memory and power. To heat a stone and sleep with it was, in a sense, to embrace something sacred. The warmth wasn't just thermal, it was the earth lending you a fragment of its energy, reminding you that you belong to it, not apart from it. As you curl around your own heated stone in this imagined wilderness, the night seems less hostile. Your toes no longer sting with frost. Your chest no longer tightens in the cold. You breathe more deeply, hearing the muffled sighs of others around you doing the same. A chorus of sleepers, each with their own secret ember, each wrapped in warmth borrowed from fire and rock. It makes you reflect on modern camping gadgets, the chemical heat packs, the rechargeable hand warmers, the insulated bottles filled with boiling water. All are echoes of this simple, timeless trick. The technology has changed, but the principle is identical. Store heat, release it slowly, survive the night, and perhaps more importantly, rest deeply enough to dream. Dreams mattered. Oral accounts tell of visions seen in sleep near the warmth of stones, messages carried in the liminal space between wakefulness and cold. Some families believe stones had voices in those moments, whispering guidance, shaping dreams. You can almost hear it now. The low hum in your ears as sleep pulls you deeper, the warmth pulsing like a heartbeat, the stone becoming more than mineral, becoming companion. And as your eyes close, you realize that warmth wasn't only personal. Someone always had to keep the central fire alive, tending it while others slept, making sure more stones could be heated when the night dragged on. That watchful rhythm carried entire camps through winter. It will be your next glimpse. The rotations of families and guards, the endless vigilance to keep fire breathing long after stars have grown pale. The stone at your side cools slowly, its warmth fading like the last note of a lullaby. You start pulling your hides tighter and notice the glow of another fire in the distance. It isn't random, this constant flame. It's guarded, nurtured, never left to die. Completely. The people around you knew that letting the fire vanish meant starting over a task nearly impossible on a freezing night. So they created systems, rotations, rhythms of watchfulness that kept the fire alive until dawn. One account from early explorers makes it clear that in many camps, families assigned fire watchers by the hour. Each adult took a turn, rising from slumber to stoke the embers, place another log, or shift the stones closer. In larger encampments, elders often sat by the hearth through the night, partly because they slept less deeply, partly because their steady presence reassured the young. Fire wasn't just flame, it was continuity. Without it, the night could swallow you. Here's a curious glimpse that sometimes slips into the records. Children were occasionally given the honor of tending the smallest hearths. Under a parent's watchful eye, a child might learn how to judge the thickness of wood, how to bank embers beneath ash so they glowed longer, how to coax sparks with a breath just strong enough. Imagine being 7 years old, entrusted with the very heartbeat of the camp. You might feel proud or frightened, or both, but you'd learn quickly that survival depended on your careful hands. You can almost hear the sounds. A rustling as someone rises reluctantly from their bedding. The quiet shuffle of feet across the dirt or snow. The scrape of a stick rearranging coals. The fire answers back with a crackle. A hiss as fresh wood catches. The glow spreads across faces half hidden under robes, casting flickering shadows on bark walls or hide ceilings. That faint light is a comfort for sleepers who do you end to wake fully, but stir just enough to know the fire is still. There, researchers continued to debate whether fire rotation was strictly scheduled or more fluid, based on who woke naturally in the night. Some anthropologists argue for a formal structure, citing oral traditions that describe duty cycles. Others suggest it was more instinctive. If you woke, you The truth may vary across regions, but the underlying point is certain. The fire was everyone's responsibility. Neglecting it was unthinkable. There's also a ritual side to the practice. Among some groups, prayers accompanied the stoking of flames, words whispered to remind the fire of its role as a living ally. Feeding the hearth became more than a task. It was a conversation, a bond renewed with each offering of wood. You sense the intimacy of that act, a relationship not with a thing, but with a being that gave light, warmth, and protection. And yet the practical side never disappeared. Fire meant defense. Predators hesitated to approach its glow, and so keeping it alive through the night kept wolves at bay. Fire meant cooking. Meat simmered in the embers, ready by morning for those who rose early. It meant light for tending wounds, warmth for thawing tools, smoke for curing hides. Fire was the axis of the night. Without it, everything collapsed. Picture the communal circle. A dozen sleepers ring the hearth, bodies oriented toward its warmth. Heads turned toward the glow. Someone stirs every hour. Not by choice, but by necessity. And though you might imagine this constant vigilance as burdensome, it carried comfort too. A sleeper could drift deeper, knowing that someone else would wake. Someone else would feed the flame. That shared responsibility bound people together. You weren't alone against the cold. And then there's the quirky detail that sometimes watchers told stories quietly to the fire itself. Early missionaries recorded moments when elders sitting alone at night spoke in low tones to the flames, recounting hunts, losses, or dreams. The fire became confident as much as protector. To imagine that scene, you wrapped in hides, drifting off while hearing a low murmur across the campfire, the voice of an elder, telling secrets not to people, but to the blaze. It's strangely comforting. The sensory experience lingers. The smell of half-burned wood, sharp and wryness. The sudden burst of sparks when a damp log hits flame. The warmth that radiates unevenly, scorching your face if you lean too close, freezing your back if you turn away. The constant glow shifting across fur and skin, painting the night with gold and shadow. The rhythm of smoke, sometimes gentle, sometimes choking, becomes part of the lullaby of survival. Modern campers still understand fragments of this. Sit around a fire long enough, and you instinctively tend it. Poke it with a stick, shift a log, blow on embers. That impulse passed down through generations connects you to those who did it not for leisure but for life. You're enacting the same ritual, though the stakes for you are comfort, not survival. And the deeper truth, fire rotation wasn't just about flame. It was about trust. To hand someone the responsibility of keeping the camp alive was to say, I believe you will protect us. In a world where betrayal meant death, such trust was a bond stronger than stone. You curl tighter under your robe now, warmed by the thought that even as you drift, someone else keeps watch. The fire hums softly, its light a heartbeat in the darkness. You close your eyes, soothed by the certainty that when you wake, warmth will still be there. And as you drift off, you sense the next lesson waiting, because sometimes the fire wasn't enough, and bodies themselves became blankets, pressed together in a web of shared heat. That story belongs to the next night, when survival came not from flame, but from human closeness. The fire flickers low, its glow steady but thin, and you stir beneath your hides. The warmth is there but faint, and you realize what the elders knew all along. Fire can't do everything by itself. Heat slips away into the night, no matter how carefully you feed the flames. That's when people leaned on something far more dependable. Each other accounts from early observers emphasize that many native communities practiced group sleeping not only for comfort, but for survival. Bodies pressed together created heat no fire could match, because your skin doesn't just hold warmth. It radiates Italiano. You imagined curling beside your family, shoulders overlapping, limbs intertwined, every heartbeat adding another pulse of heat to the shared cocoon. An intriguing note surfaces. In oral traditions, the placement of sleepers mattered. Children were tucked between adults, sometimes 2 or 3 layers deep, so their smaller bodies stayed insulated at the center. Elders often lay on the outer edges, shielding the young from cold air that crept through cracks in the hide coverings. It was practical and symbolic all at once. The old protecting the new, generation encircling generation like rings of a tree. The sensation of it is vivid. You roll against another body, their skin warmed by fire, their robe overlapping yours. The weight of someone's arm drapes across you, heavy but reassuring. You hear the rhythm of their breathing, the occasional shift or murmur in dreams. At first, closeness might feel awkward, especially to modern sensibilities that crave privacy. But here, privacy melts into survival. Alone, you freeze. Together you endure. Researchers still debate how formalized these sleeping arrangements were. Some suggest families followed strict patterns. Elders on the outside. Mothers with infants in the middle. Older children grouped by age. Others believe it was more fluid, shaped by the night's needs. Whoever was coldest claimed the warmest spot. Whatever the truth, the practice ensured that the camp woke alive, even in the cruelest months. There's a quirky glimpse from early traders. They sometimes described feeling smothered when invited to share sleeping quarters with native hosts. Accustomed to personal beds, they found the press of bodies overwhelming. Yet by morning, many admitted they'd never been warmer in winter. You can almost picture one of them grumbling at night, only to confess later with sheepish gratitude that it was the best rest they'd had in weeks. The soundscape is intimate, not just the fire crackling, but the chorus of human noises, snores rising and falling like waves, sighs slipping out in half-sleep. Soft words mumbled in dreams. The air grows humid with breath, a fog that clings to hides and walls, sometimes frosting when temperatures drop too low. It isn't glamorous, but it's alive. Every exhale reinforces the shelter, turning the cold into something bearable. Think of how modern science describes this thermal regulation through shared body heat. Infants, especially, are known to regulate temperature better when held close, their breathing syncing with the caregivers. Indigenous peoples didn't need thermometers to understand this. They felt it, knew it, lived it. Babies survived because mothers never let them sleep alone in the cold. Hunters survived because they pressed back to back under hides after a long day. It was instinct honed into tradition, and the emotional comfort mattered, too. Falling asleep, surrounded by your kin, you felt secure in more ways than one. Predators might lurk outside, storms might howl, but here in the circle of warmth, you were part of something unbreakable. The cold pressed in from all directions, but unity pushed back harder. There's also a deeper cultural resonance among some tribes. The very idea of sharing heat was tied to spiritual teaching. Warmth is a gift, never hoarded, always passed on. The fire gave to you, you gave to others, and the cycle continued. To sleep apart, hoarding warmth for yourself, was considered selfish, even dangerous. The community survived because everyone understood survival was collective. Now, imagine the tactile world of such a night. You shift and feel fur against fur, hair brushing your cheek, the pulse of a cousin's foot twitching against yours. A child stirs, kicking lightly, and the group adjusts with murmured grumbles before slipping back into sleep. In the dim firelight, the scene is messy, crowded, imperfect, but it is also profoundly human. Of course, problems arose, too. Space was limited. Arguments sparked over who had the warmest spot. A restless sleeper could disturb the whole group. But even these discomforts reinforced the reality. Survival meant compromise. You endured the irritations because the alternative was frostbite or worse. In the cold calculus of winter, annoyance was a small price to pay. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. Hikers, cutting. Snowstorms sometimes huddled together in sleeping bags to avoid hypothermia. Soldiers in frozen trenches share heat by clustering. Even pet owners today instinctively know that a dog curling against them on a cold night means safety. These moments echo the lessons indigenous peoples lived by. Heat is communal. As you drift in this imagined slumber, you notice the psychological calm it brings. To feel another's warmth is to feel their presence. To know you are not abandoned in the vast cold. It softens fear, quiets the racing mind, and makes dreams gentler. Some oral stories describe winter nights filled with shared dreams, visions that passed from sleeper to sleeper, as if the closeness of bodies allowed spirits to travel more freely. You may not believe in that, but lying here pressed against others, you can almost imagine it. And when dawn finally breaks, the group stirs slowly, the cold rushing in as hides are lifted and people separate. You feel a pang at the sudden loss of warmth, the solitude of standing again in the open. It reminds you that survival in this world was never meant to be solitary. It was always communal, always layered fire, hides, bodies, spirits. Each held part of the secret, but only together did they make it through the night. As you breathe in the frosty morning air, you realize another layer of survival awaited beyond bodies and hides. Movement itself was strategy, migration, shifting camps, chasing warmth through the seasons. That story will carry you further, teaching you how even the act of walking became a defense against freezing to death. Morning light glimmers across the snow, a pale wash that seems more cold than warm. You stand from the circle of shared sleepers, shaking stiffness from your limbs, and realize something profound. No matter how well you tend the fire, layer hides, or huddle together, there's a deeper truth. Sometimes the best way to survive winter wasn't to endure it in place. It was to move. One detail preserved in tribal memory is that many native peoples lived by the rhythm of seasonal migration. Entire communities shifted camp according to weather, following animal herds, fish runs, or simply seeking milder conditions. In the Great Plains, for example, bands might travel southward as temperatures fell, trading the sharpest blizzards for more temperate winds. In the Northwest, families descended from higher elevations into valleys where snow lay thinner. Mobility itself became the insulation. Why fight winter's worst when you could outpace it? You might be amused to learn that movement wasn't random at all. Trails carved by centuries of repetition were as familiar to these groups as city streets are to you today. Families remembered the exact sequence of valleys, rivers, and sheltering hills, passing that knowledge like a map engraved into memory, even without compasses or GPS. They navigated effortlessly by stars, rivers, or the tilt of mountains. For them, migration wasn't aimless wandering. It was a precise science of survival, tested generation after generation. The sensory world of such travel is rich. Imagine crunching snow underfoot, the squeak that comes only when temperatures fall far below freezing. Horses snort clouds of steam. Dogs bark as they pull travois loaded with hides. Children laugh or complain while bundled tightly on sleds. Overhead, ravens croak in the brittle air, their wings flashing black against the winter Sunday. The smell of smoke trails behind as campfires are extinguished, leaving only faint wisps rising from snow-darkened rings. Scholars continue to puzzle over how far these seasonal migrations extended. Some argued that tribes shifted only short distances, staying within well-defined territories. Others insist that groups like the Comanche or Lakota ranged widely, adapting routes yearly depending on weather and food. Archaeological traces, stone circles from Tippis, charred fire pits, fragments of tools hint at both possibilities. The debate itself underscores the sophistication of these movements, far from the stereotype of people wandering aimlessly. And migration wasn't only about avoiding cold, it was about resource balance. Staying too long in one place depleted firewood, scared off game, and exhausted fishing grounds. By moving, families allowed land to rest, ensuring its bounty returned the next season. Intatsin's survival wasn't just about keeping warm tonight. It was about planning for warmth 10 winters from now. You feel it physically, the ache in your legs from trudging miles through snow, the sting of wind across your cheeks, the steady burn in your lungs as you climb ridges. And yet the movement itself warms you. Blood pumps faster. Muscles generate heat. Sweat dampens your clothes despite the icy air. You realize that walking was itself a heating system. Rest too long and you risked freezing. Move and your own body became a furnace. There's a quirky detail that emerges from oral stories. Some children treated migrations like adventures, racing ahead on familiar trails, sliding down snowy banks or pretending the travois were sleds to ride. What was hardship to adults sometimes became play to the young. You can almost hear their laughter bouncing across frozen valleys. A counterpoint to the grunt of oxen or horses pulling heavy loads. At night, when camps were rebuilt, the knowledge of migration guided shelter placement. People remembered which groves blocked the north wind, which slopes caught the morning sun, which rivers offered both water and frozen passage. This wasn't luck. It was a deep relationship with the land, an awareness of its moods across decades and lifetimes. Sleeping in the right place could mean the difference between a comfortable night and frostbitten fingers. And here's another fascinating layer. Migration reinforced community ties. Moving together demanded cooperation. One family couldn't decide to linger without disrupting the group. Elders set the pace. Hunters scouted ahead. Women packed food and tools. Children learned responsibility by carrying small bundles. It was a choreography of survival, a dance across the seasons. You sensed the rhythm of it in your own body, step after step, breath after breath, the endless crunch of snow beneath moccasins or boots. The repetition becomes hypnotic, almost meditative, as if the act of walking itself is a lullaby against the cold. And when camp is finally raised again, the relief is palpable. Fire rekindled, hides unrolled, food shared, warmth restored. You fall asleep knowing that tomorrow, the journey continues. But tonight, you've outrun the worst of winter's claws. Modern echoes of this survival strategy linger in the way humans still migrate for comfort. Some travel south for winter, chasing warmth. Others simply adjust routines, closing summer cabins, moving into city apartments, booking flights to sunnier coasts. The principle remains the same. Why freeze if you can move? The only difference is that plains have replaced moccasins and highways have replaced forest trails. The psychological comfort of migration cannot be overstated either. Imagine lying down in a camp you've just raised, knowing you've chosen the best possible spot for survival. The wind rattles branches above, but your lean-to faces south, shielded by hills. The fire burns steady because wood is plentiful here. The robe feels heavier because you know food is near. Water is close. Safety is restored. Sleep comes easier when movement has delivered you from danger. And yet you wonder, how did they know when to move? When to stay? The answer often came from the natural world animal migrations. Early thaws, star positions, even subtle changes in bird songs. The land itself signaled when it was time to rise and go. To ignore those cues was to invite frost, hunger, or worse. So as you curl beneath your hides tonight, the echoes of footsteps still in your ears, you understand another layer of indigenous wisdom. Warmth wasn't always found by staying still. Sometimes warmth was a horizon, a destination, something you carried toward by moving faithfully with the seasons. And tomorrow you'll discover how even plants, grass, reeds, cattails could be turned into insulation as surprising as any animal hide. Nature provided everywhere, not just in herds or forests, but in the overlooked softness of fiber and fluff. You awaken to the creak of frozen branches and the distant cry of crows, the world still cloaked in its endless white. The camp is stopped for a few days. Migration pause to rest both people and animals. You notice something new in the shelters. Layers of plant fibers woven and stuffed, soft as clouds against the otherwise harsh environment. It's a reminder that survival wasn't only about hides and fire. It was also about using the humblest offerings of nature. Archaeological traces and oral traditions both indicate that plant materials, grasses, cattail, fluff, bulrushes, even shredded bark, were common winter companions. You picture a mat woven from dried reeds, thick as a rug, spread beneath hides to keep the icy, grounded by or perhaps a pillow-like bundle of cattail fluff, so you almost forget you're lying on frozen earth. Far from being mere filler, these fibers became insulation on par with animal skins, and in some cases lighter and easier to carry. You might be amused to learn that cattail fluff was sometimes stuffed into clothing, much like modern down. Children especially benefited from these makeshift linings, waddling about in garments puffed with plant fibers that trapped air and held warmth. Imagine the sight. Tiny figures bundled so heavily they looked round, giggling as they stumbled through snow, their breath fogging the air. What to you might seem like a clever DIY hack was for them standard winter practice. The tactile sensation is distinct. Reach down and press your hand into a cattail mat, and you feel the springy give of stalks. The faint rustle of dried fibers shifting under pressure. Lay your head against a bundle of fluff, and it cradles you softly, though it sheds bits that cling to your hair and nose. There's a faint vegetal smell, earthy and sweet, carrying a reminder of summer march, even in the dead of winter. Researchers continue to discuss just how extensive plant fiber insulation was. Some argue it was a supplemental measure used mainly when hides were scarce. Others point out that fibers show up in every climate zone, suggesting they were not an afterthought, but but a crucial layer in the survival toolkit. The lack of long-lasting remains makes certainty difficult since grasses rot quickly, leaving archaeologists little to examine. But the consistency of oral accounts suggests their role was far more important than outsiders once realized. Preparation itself was a rhythm of daily life. Families collected reeds and grasses in late summer, drying them carefully to store for winter. Cattails were stripped and fluffed, their seeds floating like snow. When handled, bark could be pounded until it shredded into fibers, woven into mats that served as bedding. Children often helped with these tasks, their small hands nimble enough to stuff fibers into crevices. The work was tedious, but without it, nights grew unbearable. And here's a delightful quirk. Cattail fluff wasn't just insulation. It also served as tinder. A single spark could catch its fibers instantly, making fire starting easier in damp conditions. So, the same material that lined your bedding could also ignite the flames that warmed your camp. Imagine lying in bed at night, knowing the softness under your head could also save you from a fireless dawn. The soundscape of a fiber-filled shelter is subtle. Every shift of your body creates a soft rustle, like wind moving through dry grass. In the stillness of night, those faint whispers mingle with the pop of firewood and the steady breathing of companions. It's a lullaby composed of the simplest materials, yet one that carries you into sleep as effectively as any grander arrangement of hides or robes. The psychological comfort mattered. Surrounded by plant fibers, sleepers felt the memory of warmer seasons. The scent of reeds and bark carried hints of lakes and forests, reminders that the land wasn't only harsh, it was generous, cyclical, enduring. In dreams, perhaps you'd drift back to summer fields, the hum of insects, the shimmer of heat across water. Even in winter, the plants sang to you, promising return. And this use of vegetation extended beyond bedding. Reed mats formed walls of shelters. Cattails stuffed into gaps sealed out drafts. Bark strips woven into screens reflected heat back toward sleepers. Every part of a plant could be adapted for warmth if you knew how to see its hidden potential. Survival here wasn't about brute force. It was about creativity, vision, and trust in small things. Of course, challenges came with it. Fibers grew damp easily, losing effectiveness if not dried. Bedding had to be refreshed, often replaced with new mats or dried near fire. Insects sometimes hid in stored bundles, emerging unwelcome during winter. Yet, even these drawbacks couldn't outweigh the benefits. Better a little dampness or a few pests than the icy sting of sleeping on bare ground. Modern echoes of this ingenuity are everywhere. Down jackets, wool insulation, synthetic fibers, all function on the same principle. Trap air, prevent heat loss. Even the fluff inside your pillow owes something to cattails, reeds, and bark stripped long ago. Technology may have refined it, but the wisdom remains indigenous at its roots. You close your eyes, imagining yourself curled on a bed of reeds, head pillowed on cattail fluff, wrapped in hides. The fire's glow touches the mat walls, shadows playing across the fibers. The air smells faintly sweet, a memory of marshes locked inside your shelter. You feel a gentleness in the night, as though nature has wrapped you not only in warmth, but in kindness. And as you drift, you know the next lesson waits. Because before sleep came rituals of heat and cleansing. Sweat lojas, those steaming sanctuaries, were more than spiritual. They also doubled as preparation for winter nights. To step from their warmth into the cold was paradoxical. Yet it carried a secret power. That will be the story you encounter next. The night feels endless. The stars frozen in their places, and the cold nor bones. No matter how thick the hides, or how tightly you curl against another sleeper. But then you recall something different. Something not built of fur, bark, or cattail fluff. A ritual space, glowing with heat and steam, where Bodhis gathered before bed. The sweat lodge. To the outsider, it might look like ceremony only, a spiritual rite of cleansing. Yet for many native peoples it was also practical, a way to fill the body with heat that carried you through the bitter night. What the records show clearly is, that sweat lodges used across North America were small domed structures of willow or saplings bent into arches, covered with hides, mats, or earth. Inside, hot stones were piled in a pit, water poured over them to create thick steam. Imagine stepping into that space after a day of biting cold, the sudden rush of heat wrapping around you, your skin prickling, sweat beading instantly. For a while, the outside world vanishes. You sit in warmth so intense, it seems impossible that frost is waiting just beyond the walls. Here's a detail that adds charm. Many people sang inside these lodges. Songs echoed against the low ceilings, blending with the hiss of steam and the crackle of stones. Laughter and chants rose together, the air heavy with moisture. It wasn't only a ritual of endurance, it was joyous, communal, even playful at times. Children joined in, giggling as the steam clouded their vision, marveling that a hut smaller than a tipi could feel like the heart of summer. The sensory world overwhelms you. The sharp tang of steam fills your nose, carrying the earthy scent of willow poles and hides. Heat presses against your skin, ticketing hit loosening your muscles. Drops of sweat trail down your back, soaking into mats beneath you. In that moment you are not shivering, but glowing, your body remembering warmth so deeply that it seems impossible the cold could return. Researchers remain divided on the balance of practical and spiritual roles. Some argue sweat lodges were primarily sacred, their heat secondary. Others point to oral traditions, describing them as preparation for winter sleep, entering warm, then stepping outside into the cold, with the body radiating heat like an ember. Perhaps both are true. Ceremony and survival braided together. To separate them would be to miss the point, because for those who lived it, life and spirit were never apart. Picture the transition. You leave the steaming lodge, skin slick, hair damp, breath pouring out like smoke. Outside, the air slams into you, cold so sharp it almost burns. Yet, instead of shivering, you feel calm. Your core still glows with the heat you've banked inside. Wrapped quickly in robes, you lie down by the fire, hides tucked over you, and sleep comes faster than it ever would without that ritual. It's as though you've smuggled a piece of the lodge into your very blood. There's a curious practice noted in some accounts. After sweat, people sometimes roll briefly in snow. To modern ears it sounds absurd, but the shocks sealed pores, dried sweat, and invigorated the body. Children laughed, adults roared in surprise, and then everyone bundled quickly into warmth. What might sound like punishment became a kind of play, a reminder that cold itself wasn't the enemy, but part of a greater balance. The lodge also carried scent into the night. Smoke from herb sage, cedar, sweet grass was often burned inside. As you curl beneath your bedding afterward, you smell those fragrances still clinging to your skin, mingling with hides and fire. Sleep drifts in on a wave of steam memory. The cold outside dulled by the body's deep reservoir of heat. And it wasn't just about warmth. The sweat lodge strengthened lungs, cleansed skin, eased muscles after hunting or gathering wood. A body rested better after being purged. Its tensions dissolved. So while you drift into slumber, your mind calm and your body heavy with pleasant fatigue, you realize that warmth wasn't merely borrowed from fire or hides. It was cultivated within you, stoked like a second flame beneath your skin. Modern echoes persist. Saunas in Scandinavia, steam baths in Turkey, hot springs worldwide. Each mirrors the same truth. Humans seek heat together, not just for survival, but for spirit. And in every case, the glow lingers after you step outside, carrying you through cold air with surprising ease. Indigenous sweat. Lodges weren't exotic oddities. They were part of a global language of warmth, expressed with local genius. And here's a quirky thought to carry into your drowsiness. Some oral traditions describe spirits of ancestors sitting in the lodge. 2. Joining the songs, their unseen presence swelling the chorus. You imagine closing your eyes, sweat dripping down your face, and feeling a hand you cannot see. Pat your shoulder. Comfort, community, connection, real or imagined. It deepened the sense of being sheltered. So as you stretch out after leaving the lodge, hides wrapped tight, your skin still buzzing with heat. You feel a rare peace. The night is still winter. The air is still deadly. But you are fortified from the inside out. And before your eyes close fully, you sense the next lesson waiting. The tools of bone and antler that carved shelters and made survival possible when wood or stone alone couldn't suffice. The ingenuity of shaping nature with nature itself. That's what you'll discover next. You wake in the cool hush after the sweat lodge, your body still glowing with residual heat. And you notice the quiet industry around camp. People aren't just resting, they're shaping. Bone and antler tools clink softly as hands carve, scrape, and bore. Survival here wasn't only about finding shelter. It was about making the tools that allowed shelters to exist. Without steel, without iron, nails, or axes, native peoples turned to the most immediate resources. The bones of the animals they hunted and the antlers shed by deer, elk, or moose. Archaeological evidence confirms that bones, antler, wedges, and sharpened scapular blades were among the earliest and most reliable instruments for building. Picture someone peeling bark with a rib honed to an edge or driving an antler wedge into frozen ground to loosen soil for a pit shelter. These weren't crude improvisations. They were crafted deliberately with skill that rivaled any blacksmith's precision. Here's a fascinating aside. Some antler tools were left partially rough on purpose. The texture gave better grip, especially in freezing weather when smooth surfaces slipped in cold hands. You can imagine a hunter smiling wryly at the idea that a polished tool might look pretty, but could cost him fingers when frostbit. Down. Practicality trumped appearance. Every time. The tactile experience is clear in your imagination. You wrap your hand around a heavy moose antler. Its surface ridged and warm despite the cold air. The weight feels balanced, the point honed by repeated scraping. As you press it against frozen ground, you feel the jolt up your arm when it strikes, the slow crumble of dirt and ice giving way. Each strike echoes survival, one more inch of soil loosened, one step closer to shelter. Researchers continue to debate the extent to which bone and antler tools replaced stone. Some argue that stone blades remained primary with bone used only as backup. Others point to where marks suggesting bone implements were everyday necessities, easier to sharpen, lighter to carry, and more versatile. The truth, as usual, may lie in a blend. Different environments favored different tools. Still, what's certain is that bone and antler were never waste. When an animal gave its body, its skeleton, too, became part of the circle of survival. The soundscape of tool-making lulls you as you drift, scraping noises as sinew strings pull across bone, a steady thump as antler wedges hammer with poles into frozen soil, the delicate crackle of bark being stripped away. These are the quiet music of preparation, the rhythms that ensured nights were spent in warmth instead of shivering under stars. And there's a curious, almost playful side to these tools. Children carved small imitations, learning the craft by copying their elders. Some of these toys survive in archaeological sites. Tiny awls and scrapers, too delicate to use. Seriously, but perfect for teaching. Picture a child proudly showing off a crooked bone needle, grinning wide when an elder nods approval. Even play carried the weight of necessity, because one day that child's skill would keep the family alive. Spiritual significance lingered too. In some traditions, antlers symbolized strength, renewal, and connection to the animal world. To use antler tools wasn't only practical, it was a way of honoring the creature that had provided both food and implements. Each strike of the wedge or cut of the scraper carried gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that survival was shared between human and animal. Modern parallels abound. Think of plastic or aluminum tools today, lightweight and durable, replacing heavier steel in certain contexts. The principle is the same. Use what works, not what tradition dictates. Bone and antler were the ultralight gear of their time, refined through endless generations of testing. Feel these tools against your skin stays with you as you settle again to rest. The antler's ridges press into your palm. The smell of fresh-shaved bone lingers, sharp and slightly sweet in the air. You picture hunters returning from the day's labor, hands roughened but proud, tools ready for tomorrow's shelter building or firewood cutting. They cold, my big, relentless. But so too is ingenuity. And then there's the quirky image you can't shake. An elder sharpening a blade by the fire, humming softly, while a child pretends to cut the air with their toy version. Around them, the camp quiets, the fire steadies, and the smell of hides and smoke fills the air. In that moment, the divide between tool, toy, ritual, and survival blurs. Everything serves life, and life serves everything. As your eyes close, you feel the weight of bone and antler tools resting nearby, silent guardians of the night. And you realize that survival wasn't only about warmth from objects, but warmth from relationships, even with animals. That truth comes clearer in the next lesson when you discover how dogs themselves became companions, not just in the hunt, but in the night's deepest cold. The faint glow of embers steadies your breathing, but this night feels colder than most. The hides are heavy, the bark wall holds firm, yet the frost creeps in all the same. You shift, pulling your robe tighter, when suddenly you feel a different kind of warmth, alive, rhythmic, breathing beside you. A dog curls against your hip, its body radiating steady heat, its fur thick and musky. You realize you are not surviving this night alone. Historical records make it clear that dogs were constant companions in many Native American communities. Long before horses arrived on the plains, they hauled loads on Travar-guarded camps and crucially shared warmth on frigid nights. Early explorers often remarked that families treated dogs as both workers and bedmates, pulling them close during winter to stave off frost. The bond wasn't sentimental only. It was profoundly practical. Here's a little twist that might amuse you. Some reports describe children piling onto dogs like living pillows. Imagine a circle of siblings asleep in a heap, arms draped over a large husky-like animal, the dog tolerating it with stoic patience. The kids stayed warm, and the dog gained the comfort of its pack. Even today, you can picture how that furry warmth would feel against your frozen toes. The tactile experience is immediate in your mind. Your hand sinks into thick fur, coarse at the top, but soft beneath, a faint smell of smoke and earth rising with the warmth. The dog shifts slightly, sighing, its body vibrating with low snores. The sensation is different from hides or heated stones. This warmth breathes, moves, responds to your touch. It is companionship as much as insulation. Researchers still debate how widespread this practice was. Some evidence suggests dogs slept mainly with children, offering both warmth and protection. Others argue adults who relied on them, particularly hunters away from camp. The truth likely varied by region, but what remains clear is that no creature was wasted. Dogs hunted, carried, barked alarms, and then lay down to serve as blankets when needed. And dogs weren't just passive providers of heat. They chose their spots strategically. A clever animal curled against a fire's edge, then pressed itself against your side, acting as a living conduit of warmth. In groups, dogs piled among people, their combined heat raising the entire shelter's temperature. You imagine drifting off to the muffled sound of multiple canines breathing steadily, their presence transforming the fragile shelter into something closer to home. There's an odd footnote, too. Early fur traders complained about the smell of camps thick with dogs, describing it as overpowering. Yet, what they dismissed as stench was simply the natural odor of survival. To indigenous families, the scent of dog meant warmth, vigilance, loyalty. It was the smell of life, preserved through winter. The soundscape at night was distinctive. Beyond the fire crackling and the snores of humans, dogs whimpered in dreams, paws twitching as if chasing something unseen. Occasionally, a low growl rumbled when wolves howled outside the circle, reminding you that these animals were not just heaters, but guardians. Falling asleep with a dog pressed against you, you knew danger outside would not approach unnoticed, and spiritually, dogs carried deeper meaning. In some traditions, they were guides to the afterlife, guardians between worlds. To sleep with one beside you is not merely comfort, but protection of the soul. Their warmth wasn't just physical, it was reassurance that even in dreams, you weren't alone. Modern parallels are obvious. Millions of people still let dogs share their beds, not out of necessity, but affection. Yet even now, pet owners wake on winter mornings with cold feet warmed by a loyal animal curled at the bottom of the bed. That primal exchange heat for companionship remains unchanged. The emotional comfort of it lingers with you as you imagine lying in that crowded shelter. Children giggle softly before sleep, hugging a dog tight. Eldest smile faintly, listening to the canine chorus of snores and yips. Hunters rest easier knowing their companions will alert them if trouble nears. The warmth isn't just thermal, it's emotional, communal, stitched into the rhythm of camp life. And of course, not every night was peaceful. Dogs sometimes fought for space or barked suddenly at shadows, disturbing sleep. Fleas and ticks traveled between fur and human. Yet even these inconveniences were tolerated because without the dogs, nights would have been crueler, colder, lonelier. Survival rarely meant perfection. It meant partnership. You reach out, now in your mind, stroking the dog curled beside you, its fur thick with winter. Its ears twitch as it dreams. You feel your own breath sinking with its rhythm, a strange comfort that slows your heartbeat, loosens your muscles, wrapped in hides, pressed against both family and animal. You realize how deeply intertwined life was here. Humans did not conquer winter alone. They survived by weaving their lives with the animals that walked beside them. And as you drift into sleep with this loyal warmth at your side, another image stirs. Beyond the circle of sleepers, the cold night is not entirely still. Someone else is awake. Pasine slowly eyes, scanning the forest under moonlight, ensuring no spark fades, no predator approaches. The quiet duty of moonlit patrols. That is where your journey leads next. The dog stirs against your hip, ears twitching, then lets out a low growl that fades into silence. You open your eyes, and beyond the glow of the fire, you glimpse a figure moving slowly in the moonlight. It isn't a wolf or wandering spirit. It's one of your own, pacing deliberately. A watchful guardian, ensuring the camp doesn't slip too deeply into comfort. Not everyone slept through the night. Some rose in silence, walking the perimeter, tending flames, listening for the smallest shift in the forest. These were the moonlit patrols, the quiet work that kept families alive. Historical descriptions tell us plainly that in many native encampments, someone always kept watch. This wasn't just about feeding the fire, it was about vigilance. Wolves prowled at the edges, bears sometimes woke from hibernation, and enemies could approach unseen in the darkness. To fall into total sleep was to invite disaster, and so patrols were woven into the rhythm of winter nights. A slow circling, a constant listening, an assurance that the camp was never fully vulnerable. Here's a detail that feels both practical and poetic. Watchers often timed their patrols by the moon. The waxing or waning glow determined how far they could see, where shadows fell, how long each circuit of the camp took. In a world without clocks, the sky was the schedule. Imagine stepping out into crisp night air, the snow crunching under your moccasins, glancing upward to judge your time, not by numbers, but by the silver discs sliding across the heavens. The sensory experience is vivid. You feel the cold bite harder once you leave the shared warmth of hides. Your breath puffs white, freezing against the edge of your hood. The ground beneath you squeaks sharply with each step, the sound carrying far in the silence. From inside the camp, you hear the muffled snores of sleepers, the soft crackle of fire, the occasional whimper of a dreaming dog. But outside on the perimeter, it is only you and the vastness of winter. Scholars continue to debate how structured these patrols were. Some evidence suggests formal rotation, each adult responsible for a set time during the night. Other accounts describe more fluid systems where lighter sleepers rose naturally, took a turn, and returned to rest when fatigued won. Perhaps it shifted depending on season, danger, or tribe. But the constant remains, someone always carried the burden of wakefulness, so others could dream in peace. You can almost hear the mind of the watcher as he walks. He notes the sparks drifting upward from the fire, making sure no embers fly into bark walls. He listens for wolves. Are they near or far off tonight? He pauses to gaze at the stars, checking their arrangement, noting shifts that might predict weather changes. Then he returns to the fire, kneels, stirs the coals, and lays a log gently across them, watching it hiss and catch. His hands smell of smoke now. His cheeks sting with cold, but he feels a quiet satisfaction. The camp is safe, and sometimes watchers spoke to themselves or to the fire or to the spirits they believed hovered near. One missionary recorded hearing a man whisper prayers into the night, thanking the moon for its light, asking the trees to guard the children, promising to feed the fire faithfully. To him, patrol wasn't drudgery. It was a sacred duty, a conversation with the living world. You imagine your own breath forming words in that cold air. Soft prayers carried upward into the glittering stars. There's a quirky glimpse that might make you smile. Young men sometimes treated patrol as an opportunity to boast bravery. They would walk farther than necessary, daring themselves to approach the Triine to prove they weren't afraid. Elders shook their heads at such recklessness, but the impulse was timeless. Youth tested themselves against fear. Perhaps one stumbled back later, cheeks flushed, insisting he'd chased a shadow away. Whether true or not, the story added warmth to morning laughter. The textures of patrol are distinct. Your moccasins press into snow, leaving crisp impressions that will fade with the next flurry. Your cloak crackles slightly with frost forming along its edges. Your hands ache as you hold a stick, ready to shift embers or ward off an animal. Every sense sharpens. The faint hoot of an owl, the rustle of branches, the shifting glow of fire reflecting off ice crystals. Sleepiness tugs at you, but vigilance pushes it back. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. Soldiers still keep watch in rotation. Parents sit awake while infants sleep. Security guards pace empty buildings at night. The practice is the same. One wakes so that many may rest. But in the wilderness, the stakes were absolute. A single lapse could mean frozen bodies, devoured stores, or worse. To patrol, wash, to carry life itself on your shoulders. The psychological weight mattered as much as the cold. Imagine knowing that, while everyone else lies peacefully, you are the thin wall between them and death. It sharpens your mind, deepens your sense of belonging. You patrol not only for yourself, but for the entire circle. Children, elders, hunters, dogs, fire. Each step is responsibility, embodied, and yet there is a strange peace to it too. The quiet, the moonlight, the rhythm of breath and step. These things lull even the watcher into a trance. Many later recalled moments of awe. The aurora shimmering overhead, wolves howling in harmony from far hills, snow falling silently in a way that made the world feel sacred. To patrol was to witness the beauty of night in ways sleepers never could. As dawn edges closer, the watcher kneels once more by the fire, coaxing flames higher for the waking day. He slips back under his robe, his body chilled, but his spirit content, knowing he has carried his share. Another will rise tomorrow and another after that as long as the camp stands. And as you drift into your own drowsy state, wrapped in warmth regained from hides and fire, you realize the next lesson awaits. Shelters not of bark or snow this time, but portable teepees, ingenious homes that balanced warmth and mobility, allowing whole nations to follow the buffalo without freezing in the night. The patrol fades back into the shadows, and dawn paints the horizon pale blue. Sit up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and notice the outlines of homes scattered across the snowy plain. Tall, elegant structures rise like inverted cones, their hides stretched smooth, poles pointing skyward as though in conversation with the heavens. These are teepees, and they are more than homes. They are the embodiment of warmth, made portable. The architectural secret that allowed entire nations to move freely yet never freeze. Historical records leave little doubt. The teepee was one of the most efficient shelters ever devised for cold climates. A frame of long poles, usually 12 to 20 in number, lashed at the top and spread in a circle, created a stable skeleton. Over this, heavy buffalo hides were draped, stitched, and pinned, forming a weatherproof skin. Inside, a central fire pit glowed, its smoke drawn upward through an adjustable flap at the peak. Imagine yourself stepping into one. Your body shivers at first in the frosty air, then immediately relaxes as warmth envelops you. The glow of flames flickering across curved walls of hide. You might be intrigued to know that tipis breathed. Unlike rigid houses, they adjusted naturally to weather. In summer, the flaps could be rolled back for ventilation. In winter, they were lowered tightly, sometimes doubled with extra hides for insulation. The slanted walls deflected wind, while the circular design ensured that no draft lingered long. It was a house tuned perfectly to the rhythms of nature, flexible where modern walls are stubborn. The tactile world inside is rich. Reach out, and you feel the soft, slightly oily texture of buffalo hide, its surface faintly smoky from months of fires. Press your palm against the poles, and they are smooth from use, each one marked by years of assembly and disassembly. Beneath you, a carpet of reeds or hides muffles the frozen ground. Springy under your weight, the air smells of smoke, fur, and roasted meat, a combination both pungent and comforting. Scholars still discuss the precise origins of the teepee. Some argue its design spread outward from the northern plains, while others suggest multiple regions independently created similar structures. The debate highlights how ingenious yet practical the form was, lightweight enough for travel, sturdy enough for blizzards. Wherever its roots lay, by the 18th century, the teepee had become iconic, a symbol of both mobility and endurance. Now picture the scene on a long winter night. A fire crackles in the center, small enough not to overwhelm, but steady enough to warm the circular space. Children sit closest, basking in the glow, while adults rest around the edges. The smoke rises slowly, drifting toward the peak. You lie back against a robe, listening to sparks crackle and the low murmur of voices. Outside, snow falls silently, piling against the base, sealing the teepee even tighter. Inside, it feels like another world. Cozy, communal, safe. Here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Families often mark their tipis with personal symbols painted on the hides. Some depicted dreams, visions, or great hunts. Others used patterns of stars or animals. So while each teepee shared the same basic shape, no two were truly alike. Imagine drifting to sleep beneath painted images of buffalo or constellations, the flicker of firelight making them seem to move across the walls. It wasn't just shelter. It was story, identity, memory. The process of setting one up was itself a ritual of efficiency. Women who traditionally oversaw construction could raise a full teepee in less than an hour. Poles were leaned, tied, spread, and covered with a practiced rhythm honed since childhood. Children helped by holding ropes or fetching smaller hides. To watch the process was to see a family build a house, not of nails and boards, but of skill and memory. Modern designers still marvel at the teepee's aerodynamic resilience. Its cone shape sheds wind instead of resisting it, while the tilt-a-poles allows smoke to escape without letting too much cold in. You might spend thousands today on high-tech tents and ventilation systems, yet none balance portability and comfort as elegantly as this centuries-old invention. The soundscape inside lulls you, the hiss of snowflakes melting on the outer hides, the rhythmic creak of poles shifting as the wind presses against them. The fires crackle at the heart of it all, filling the space with warmth. Around you, voices murmur softly, fading as sleepers curl under robes. A baby whimpers briefly, soothed by a mother's hum. The wind outside wails, but inside the world is gentle, and emotionally the teepee gave more than warmth. It gave dignity. A family could carry its home across the plains, raise it anew wherever buffalo roamed, and never feel homeless. To sleep inside was to know stability in motion, comfort in uncertainty. The very walls reminded you that survival didn't mean staying still. It meant carrying your world with you. There's also a spiritual thread. Some tribes saw the teepee's poles as representing the ribs of a great being, its walls, the sheltering skin of the earth itself. To sleep inside was to rest within creation, protected by forces larger than yourself. You close your eyes and imagine lying in that living circle, your dreams framed by sacred geometry, your breath rising with the smoke toward the stars. Of course, the teepee wasn't flawless. In violent storms, smoke flaps rattled, drafts crept in, and fires sometimes sparked dangerously close to bedding. Families had to be vigilant, adjusting constantly, learning by instinct how to balance air, flame, and hide. But imperfection never meant failure. It meant adaptation, the willingness to listen to the house itself and respond. As dawn approaches, the fire dims, but the tipi still holds its warmth. You wake not stiff and frozen, but restored, ready to move camp again if needed. And as you step outside, you see another kind of shelter waiting in milder climates. Red huts and woven mats, breathable yet protective. Another testament how survival always bent itself to place and season. You step out of the teepee, the air crisp and glittering with frost. But soon you wander farther south in your imagination. The biting wind eases, snow thins into patches, and rivers no longer lie, frozen in silence. In these milder places, warmth did not come only from buffalo hides or snow caves. Instead, it came from reeds, rushes, and woven mats, the kind of shelters that breathed with the air, yet still shielded sleepers from chill. Archaeological remains, sparse but telling, show that across wetlands and coastal plains, many native groups built red huts or mat. The principle was simple. Gather bulrushes, reeds, or tool plants, dry them, and weave them into broad mats. These mats could be layered over frameworks of poles. Much like bark or hides in colder regions, they kept out wind and rain while allowing air to circulate. Perfect for climates where winters were cool but not brutal. You might be surprised to learn that these mats weren't only for walls. Families spread them beneath bedding, stacked them as insulation, or rolled them into pillows. A reed mat might serve as floor, wall, roof, and blanket depending on need. They were as versatile as the cattail fluff you imagined earlier, but sturdier, easier to carry, and reusable for years. Picture the tactile sensation of lying down on one of these mats. Your hand brushes over the surface, smooth in one direction, prickly in the other, with faint grooves from where reeds were tied beneath. The mat cracks softly as it shifts against the ground. Above, more mats hang as walls, the gaps small enough to block wind, but wide enough to let smoke curl through. You inhale, and the air smells faintly of dried grass, sun-warmed and earthy, even in the heart of winter. Historians continue to discuss whether reed huts were purely seasonal or used year-round. Some evidence suggests tribes along the California coast and in the southeast lived in such shelters year after year, their mats replaced when worn. Others argue they were more transitional, built quickly for seasonal hunting or fishing trips. The debate remains unresolved, but what's clear is their importance. Without mats, nights by riverbanks or lakes, shores would have been far harsher. And here's a quirky glimpse into daily life. Children sometimes played by rolling themselves tightly in red mats, pretending to be cocoons or animals. Early European observers wrote buzzidly about these red burritos, as though children had invented a game out of insulation. Yet this play carried subtle lessons, too. By handling mats from a young age, children learned how to weave, repair, and respect the materials that would one day keep their families warm. The soundscape inside a reed hut is different from a tipi or snow cave. When wind blows, the mats rustle softly, almost like leaves in summer. Rain patters lightly, absorbed into layers before dripping harmlessly to the ground. Fire pops in the center, the smoke drifting upward through small openings around you. The night feels less claustrophobic, more airy, yet still protective. The hut breathes and you breathe with it. Preparation of these mats was labor-intensive. Women harvested reeds in late summer, cutting them close to the root, bundling them, and leaving them to dry. Later, they wove them into long panels, using twine made of bark or fiber. Each mat had to be strong enough to bend, yet flexible enough to roll. Stored carefully, they could be carried on a travois or boat to the next site, then unrolled and lashed into place. In a few hours, an entire house took shape. Modern campers might recognize the genius here. Woven mats are essentially the ancestor of today's portable roll-up sleeping pads and tarps. Lightweight, multi-purpose, easy to set and pack. The principle of less is more resonates across centuries. Emotionally, red huts carried a different comfort than buffalo hide teepees or snow shelters. They whispered of rivers, marshes, and open skies. Their scent recalled harvest time, the hum of insects, the warmth of Sunday. To sleep in one was to remember seasons of abundance, even when frost rimmed the ground. The hut itself became a memory capsule, wrapping sleepers in both warmth and nostalgia. There's also a spiritual dimension here. In some traditions, reeds symbolized flexibility and resilience. They bent without breaking, thrived in both water and air, and grew back no matter how often they were cut. To live within red walls was to embody those same qualities. Adaptability, endurance, renewal. You close your eyes and imagine drifting to sleep inside such a hut. Your dreams shaped by the whisper of reeds reminding you to bend, not break. Of course, red huts had their flaws. They could not withstand blizzards the way a snow cave or teepee could. In floods, mats rotted or warped, and constant repairs were necessary. But in climates where extremes were rare, they provided the perfect balance of shelter and breathability. You didn't need a fortress when the cold was kinder. The sounds of night continue in your imagination, frogs croaking faintly from a nearby marsh, owls hooting above, the rustle of mats shifting with the wind. Inside, a family huddles together. The fires glow, bouncing against woven walls. A child coughs, lightly soothed by a grandmother's hand. The hut holds them simple, yet sufficient, carrying them into morning. And as you rest here, wrapped in both hides and reeds, you sense another lesson rising on the horizon. Survival wasn't just about static shelters. It also extended into the places where food was gathered. Think of hunters and fishers camped on frozen lakes, building fires along the shore. Even in the pursuit of food, warmth had to be engineered. That story waits for you next. By the glow of flames reflected on ice, the reed hut fades into memory, its whispering walls left behind as you travel north again in your mind. The air grows sharper. Your breath turns whiter, and before you lies a frozen lake, solid as stone beneath the moonlight. Here, warmth is not just about sleeping. It is about enduring the hours spent fishing, hunting, and waiting in the open cold. Imagine yourself crouching by a hole cut into the ice, your fingers stiff, your stomach growling, and knowing that without fire, the night could be merciless. One certainty that emerges from historical accounts is that native fishers and hunters carried the fire with them, even onto the ice. Fireside encampments dotted lake's shores, smoke curling upward as men and women tended lines or nets beneath frozen surfaces. The flames weren't merely for cooking the catch. They created pockets of warmth, places where frostbite loosened its grip and bodies could rest. Picture the glow of several small fires scattered across a lake, their light reflecting on the ice like lanterns in a cathedral of winter. And here's an odd, memorable detail. In some regions, people built raised wooden platforms or placed flat stones under fires to prevent the ice from melting through. Fire lit directly on frozen water would slowly sink, so ingenuity demanded barriers. Slabs of bark, ledgers of soil, even mats of reeds. Anything that would let the flames burn without plunging into the depths below. You smile at the thought, humans fragile against the cold, tricking ice itself into hosting fire. The sensory world is intense. The crackle of fire mingles with the groan of shifting ice. You feel the sting of wind against your cheeks, sharp as knives. But the front of your body warms, glowing red, where the flames lick outward. Your hands stiff and aching, thaw as you hold them toward the blaze. Steam rising from damp mittens. Around you, the night is vast, an endless white plain with stars shimmering above. But in this circle of light, it feels intimate, almost cozy. Archaeologists still discuss how permanent such lakeside encampments were. Some argue that families lived in semi-structured huts nearby for the entire winter, venturing onto the ice daily. Others believe these fires were temporary, built only during expeditions. The evidence is ambiguous. Charred stones found along ancient shorelines, blackened soil where fires once burned. What remains clear is the principle: fire followed food, and food often lived beneath ice. Imagine the rhythm of such nights. Hunters cut holes with bone or stone tools, lowering lines baited with preserved scraps. Others set nets beneath the ice, careful to mark their locations. Meanwhile, the fire never rested. Someone always fed it, not just for warmth, but to cook the catch immediately. Picture the smell of fresh fish sizzling on a stick, the fat dripping into flames. The scent mingling with smoke and frost. Hunger quiets. Bellies fill. Warmth spreads from inside out. You sleep later, with both body and spirit satisfied. There's a quirky glimpse from oral stories. Sometimes, children roasted bits of fish skin like snacks, crisping them until they curled. These little treats doubled as entertainment. The crunch echoing in the frozen silence. Even in hardship, small pleasures soften the edge of cold. The textures of the scene ground you further. The ice beneath your feet is hard, smooth, and faintly slick. The fire crackles on its platform. Bark or soil beneath it, steaming where heat meets frozen water. Your robe smells of fish oil, your fingers greasy from handling lines. Yet you don't mind the smell of food means survival. You shift closer to the fire, pressing shoulders with others, and let the warmth soak in. Spiritual meaning accompanied these lakeside fires as well. Water was sacred, the home of powerful beings. To cut through ice and draw life from below was an act of reverence. Fire above, water below, the two elements balanced each other, protecting and feeding the people. Stories told around those lakeside blazes often reflected that harmony. Feasts as gifts, flames as guardians, humans as mediators between forces. Modern parallels are easy to find. Ice fishers still build shelters on frozen lakes, hauling propane heaters or stoves to chase away frost. Yet the principle is unchanged. Fire on the ice, warmth in the void, survival built on the marriage of danger and ingenuity. Every modern fishing shanty echoes the first fires that flickered on ancient lakes, and the psychological comfort mattered as much as the practical. Sitting by the blaze, you felt less exposed on the endless ice. Flames turned the void into a room, gave edges to the emptiness. The laughter of companions, the taste of hot food, the smell of smoke, all stitched together into reassurance. You might still shiver, but you no longer despaired. Of course, risks remained. Fires too hot could melt their platforms, sending embers crashing into water. Cracks sometimes echoed across the lake, making hearts race. But fear never fully conquered the ritual. The fire was rebuilt, the nets reset, the meal prepared again. The cold could frighten, but it could not dictate. Now, as you finish your imagined meal and curl near the fire's dying embers, you realize warmth was also shaped by change. For when trade brought wool, blankets, beads, and metal tools, survival itself shifted. The old tricks blended with new goods, and winter nights were never quite the same. That story of adaptation, of trade for warmth, is what you'll explore next. The fire on the ice sputters low, and you rub your hands together, letting the warmth fade into memory. But as you turn toward camp, you notice something different spread over sleeping families. Not just hides, not just reeds or bark mats, but brightly patterned wool blankets. They seem strange at first, out of place in the wilderness. Yet they carry their own story. These were trade goods, and once they entered native camps, they forever altered the way people endured winter nights. One detail that historians agree upon is that wool blankets arrived early in the era of European contact, brought by traders in the 17th century and spreading rapidly through networks across the continent. By the 18th and 19th centuries, they were ubiquitous, often exchanged for furs, food, or labor. You can picture a trader unrolling a stack of blankets in a village square, thick, bright, striped with bold colors. Two families accustomed to hides heavy with smoke and musk. These new blankets must have felt like small miracles. And here's a curious detail worth imagining. Some of the most prized wool blankets were patterned in ways that carried meaning. Tehutsens. Bay Company famously produced striped point blankets, each marked with small black lines that indicated size. To Europeans, these were measurements. To native families, they became symbols of trade and status. Owning such a blanket wasn't only about warmth. It was about connection to a new, rapidly shifting world. The sensory contrast is striking. A wool blanket feels different from buffalo hide. Lighter, softer, less oily. When you pull it over your shoulders, it scratches faintly, the fibers catching on your skin. It smells of lanolin at first, not smoke, and its bright dye glows even in the dim light of fire. Compared to the earthy musk of hides, the wool seems almost luxurious. Yet beneath that comfort lies a complicated story. Scholars remain divided on the balance of adoption versus resistance. Some argue that wool quickly displaced hides as the bedding of choice, prized for its portability and ease of use. Others insist hides remain dominant, with blankets supplementing but not replacing them. The archaeological record, fragments of cloth, trader journals, oral accounts offers evidence in both directions. What is clear is that blankets changed the rhythm of survival, easing some labors while entangling communities more deeply in trade economies. Picture a winter night in a plains tipi after wool blankets had arrived. Families still lay on buffalo robes, still wrapped children in hides. But now the top layer might be a wool cover, its colors flickering orange in the firelight. The blanket traps the heat already gathered by skins and bodies, creating an additional layer of comfort. For a mother tucking in her child, the combination must have felt like security multiplied old ways, reinforced by new cloth. Here's a quirky observation from early journals. Some people cut wool blankets into strips, sewing them into garments or decorating robes. The fabric wasn't just bedding, it was raw material repurposed creatively. A blanket might serve as coat by day, cover by night, and gift at ceremonies. Its versatility made it more than an object. It became part of cultural expression. The soundscape of wool is subtle. Unlike hides that creak or mats that rustle, wool muffles. When you shift beneath it, the noise is a soft scrape, barely audible. Sleepers move quietly, the night less punctuated by sound. The fire crackles, dogs snore, but the blanket itself holds silence, wrapping you in stillness. And yet there was danger woven into those bright threads. Blankets carried diseases, most notoriously smallpox, sometimes unintentionally and sometimes tragically by design. To think of warmth entwined with sickness is chilling. Objects that promised life also delivered death. The memory of those epidemics lingers in oral history, a reminder that survival was never just about cleverness or adaptation. It was also about vulnerability to forces beyond control. Despite that dark shadow, blankets endured as treasured goods. They became heirlooms traded across generations, valued not only for warmth, but for beauty. To be wrapped in one was to feel both the comfort of the present and the weight of family memory. Even today, Pendleton blankets, descendants of those first wool trades, are gifted at births, weddings, and ceremonies. Warmth, after all, is never just physical. It is symbolic, communal, enduring. Think of your own life. Perhaps you've pulled a blanket across your body on a cold night, one that carried your grandmother's scent, or one bought on a trip that reminds you of a place. The warmth is more than heat. It is memory. In this way, the story of wool blankets is not foreign. It is human, universal. You settle deeper into the imagined fabric. Now, the scratch of wool against your skin, the firelight painting its colors brighter than they are. You feel lighter than when wrapped in hides, yet just as secure. The blend of old and new makes you wonder how else indigenous peoples healed their bodies and spirits against winter's bite. And that thought leads you forward to the herbs, fuses, and heated packs that soothed frostbitten limbs before sleep. Medicines of warmth. That is your next lesson. The wool blanket still clings to your shoulders, its scratchy softness a curious comfort. But warmth wasn't always enough. The wilderness could gnaw at your body in ways hides and fires couldn't mend numb fingers, atching joints, skin bitten raw by frost. That's when knowledge shifted from shelter to medicine. Herbs, picuses, and heated packs became quiet healers tucked into bedding at night to soothe pain and coax sleep back into weary limbs. What we know from oral traditions and ethnobotanical studies is that native peoples across the continent cultivated a rich pharmacy of warming remedies. Cedar and pine needles were steeped into teas that spread heat through the chest, easing breath on cold nights. Spruce resin was smeared onto skin to protect against windburn, its sticky layer sealing warmth. And picuses made from bear grease or marrow, sometimes heated over the fire, were wrapped in bark or cloth and pressed to stiff muscles before sleep. You imagine lying beneath hides, the faint smell of resin and smoke filling your nose. the ache in your fingers slowly easing. Here's a curious twist. Some tribes used heated sand as a kind of therapeutic pack. Sand was collected, warmed by the fire, then poured into deerskin bags and applied to frostbitten toes or chilled bellies. The warmth radiated evenly, lingering longer than hot stones. Imagine cradling such a bag under your robes at night. Its steady glow, calming not just the body, but the mind. The sensations are vivid. Your skin tingles where salve has been rubbed. The smell of herbs clings to your breath, and the soft weight of a heated pack rests heavy against your side. The cold outside feels distant now, pushed back by remedies that transform nature's raw edges into gentle medicine. You shift slightly under the covers, hearing the faint crackle of resin drying on your skin, and feel yourself slipping into deeper rest. Researchers remain divided on how much of this knowledge was purely practical versus ceremonial. Some argue that herbs were chosen for chemical effectiveness. Cedar's antiseptic oils, pines, vitamin C spruce, resins, protective layer. Others emphasized the spiritual meaning, pointing out that healing rituals often included songs, prayers, or smudging. The truth, of course, is both science and spirit braided together. A pus might soothe frostbite physically, but the accompanying chant reassured the soul. Healing was holistic, long before the word existed. Picture a winter night in camp. A child returns from play with hands swollen red from snow. A grandmother kneels by the fire, heating a small bundle of herbs, then wraps it gently around the fingers. She murmurs words of comfort, blowing softly on the pack to cool it before pressing it close. The child sighs, curling into robes, the smell of cedar clinging like perfume. Soon sleep washes over them, the pain forgotten. That small ritual has kept countless generations alive through cold seasons. And here's a quirky note that might make you smile. Some remedies doubled as flavorings for food. A tea brewed to warm the chest might also be served with dried meat, blurring the line between medicine and meal. You can picture someone laughing softly as they sip, teasing that the doctor tastes like supper tonight. Survival was never compartmentalized. Everything served multiple purposes. The soundscape of medicine is gentler than that of shelters or fires. It's the bubbling of water in a pot, the soft grinding of roots, the hiss of steam as spices are lifted from embers. Over it all, voices murmur low, reassuring, telling stories to distract from pain. In that environment, healing feels as much emotional as physical. The textures stay with you, resin sticky on your fingertips, bark rough against skin where a pack is tied, fur pressing down over everything, locking warmth inside. You close your eyes and feel the glow, radiating outward, not fierce like fire, but steady, calming, enough to keep fear of frost at bay. Modern medicine echoes these tricks in surprising ways. Heating pads, vapor rubs, herbal teas, all descendants of practices indigenous peoples refined long ago. What we buy at Tarmasisto Day once grew wild in forests, gathered by hands that knew which plant soothed, which resin healed, which herb could chase cold from bone. And emotionally, these remedies mattered as reassurance. Falling asleep with a heated pack on your chest, you didn't just feel warmer, you felt cared for. Someone had gathered the herbs, prepared the pus, stayed awake by the fire to heat it for you. That intimacy stitched warmth directly into relationships. Healing wasn't anonymous. It was personal, communal, loving. But challenges lurked, too. Some herbs burned if applied carelessly. Some packs grew cold too fast, leaving dampness that chilled instead of comforted. Trial and error shaped the knowledge, and each winter carried its own risks. Yet slowly across centuries, communities perfected these remedies, weaving them into nightly routines that made survival possible. As you breathe in the scent of cedar and let the heat seep deeper into your bones, you understand the wisdom at play. Survival wasn't only about walls and fires, it was about tending the body as carefully as the flame. A fire left untended goes out. A body left uncared for falters. Both needed feeding, stoking, and gentle vigilance. And tomorrow, you'll see how even children played their part, not only by being healed, but by creating warmth themselves. Games in the snow, dances by the fire, rituals of laughter that kept their blood moving and their spirits high. For in winter warmth also came from joy. The cedar scent lingers in your nose. The warmth of Picus is still, glowing faintly on your skin when laughter ripples through the camp. Children tumble across the snow, chasing one another in wide circles, their breath rising in white bursts. At first you think of them as only playing, but then you realize this is survival, too. Movement, laughter, and games weren't merely entertainment in the wilderness. They were warmth in disguise. Accounts from early observers describe children rolling in snow, dashing between tipis, or leaping across icy streams, only to collapse in heaps of giggles. Adults smiled at the chaos, not only because it lifted spirits, but because it kept little bodies warm. A child in constant motion was less likely to shiver, less likely to grow stiff and sick in the cold. What looked like play was, in truth, a carefully tolerated survival mechanism. Here's a detail that makes you pause. Even in the coldest nights, some children were sent running short distances before bed. The idea was simple. Let their blood pump, let their cheeks flush, so that when they curled into hides, their bodies carried heat into the shared bedding. Imagine a mother urging her son to sprint to the nearest tree and back, his legs pounding, his breath ragged, and then tucking him quickly between siblings, so that warmth radiated from his still glowing skin. A game turned into insulation. The sensory world is lively. Snow squeaks under bare feet or soft moccasins. Shrieks echo as children dodge one another. Dogs bark, joining the chase. The fire flickers brighter with each gust of running bodies stirring air. When the game ends, the children collapse into piles of furs, their laughter dissolving into yawns, their limbs twitching with leftover energy. Sleep comes fast after such exertion, their warmth spilling into the group. Scholars continue to discuss whether these activities were deliberate strategies taught by elders or simply natural exuberance channeled wisely. Some accounts frame them as intentional routines, almost like exercises. Others suggest adults simply allowed children's instinctive play to do the work. Either way, the outcome was the same. Movement prevented cold from claiming young bodies during the long nights, and play wasn't limited to children. Adults joined dances by the fire, contests of endurance, snowball skirmishes, or simple storytelling accompanied by gestures and laughter. Each activity stirred blood, loosened stiff muscles, and left people warmer before lying down. You imagine yourself stepping into a circled dance on a frigid night, your body swaying, stamping, your breath steaming, laughter bursting from your lips. By the time the dance ends, your heart pounds hot in your chest, and you fall into bedding with warmth that lasts hours. There's a quirky anecdote from fur traders who witnessed children sliding on frozen hills using flattened bark as sleds. They complained the noise disturbed their sleep, but later admitted the children rarely seemed cold despite thin clothing. The answer was obvious. Joy kept them warm. You can almost hear the shrieks echo across the frozen valley. A melody of resilience disguised as mischief. The textures of play linger in your imagination. Bark sled smooth under tiny hands. Snow clumps sticking to leggings, hair damp with sweat despite the chill. Even the feel of a child's hand. Icy at first, then growing warm as it clutches yours during a game. Warmth born not from fire or hides, but from energy and closeness. Spiritual teachings sometimes wove this truth into story. Some tales warned that laziness invited cold spirits, while laughter and movement kept those spirits at bay. To sleep without play was to court frost. To go to bed smiling was to invite dreams instead of nightmares. These lessons wrapped survival in myth, ensuring children understood instinctively that joy itself was a form of protection. Modern echoes are easy to find. Parents today know that children who run and play outside fall asleep faster and warmer. Doctors recommend movement to improve circulation on cold days. Athletes train in winter not just for strength, but to avoid hypothermia. The principle is timeless. Heat is made, not only borrowed, and the emotional comfort mattered deeply. Imagine ending a day of hardship with laughter echoing across the camp. Spirits lifted, worries lightened, even hunger eased for a while. Warmth here was more than physical. It was joy layered over struggle, laughter woven into survival. You close your eyes and feel that truth settle into you. A camp filled with laughter is a camp that wakes alive. Of course, not every game was safe. Sometimes children slipped on ice. Sometimes they grew too sweaty and chilled afterward. Elders kept careful eyes, stepping into calm play when it threatened health. Balance was always the law of winter survival. Too much risk and warmth turned to danger. As you lie back now, your mind replaying the sound of children's laughter blending with crackling fire, you realized survival wasn't built only on hides and firewood. It was built on movement, energy, and joy. And when play settled into exhaustion, stories carried the warmth further. 4 words themselves became blankets, tallies told around flames, wrapping listeners in comfort until sleep claimed them. That will be the next secret you uncover. The fireside stories that turned fear into dreams and kept spirits warm through the coldest nights. The echoes of children's laughter fade, and the camp grows still again. The fire burns low, shadows stretch across hides and mats, and you hear a voice begin to rise from the circle. It is not the crackle of flames or the bark of dogs this time, but a story woven low and slow, carrying warmth that is more than heat. Words themselves become blankets here, wrapping sleepers in comfort as effectively as any robe. Historical accounts describe winter storytelling as central to indigenous life. When nights stretched long and food was scarce, stories filled the hours with purpose. They were entertainment, yes, but also education, spiritual guide, and psychological balm. Elders told tales of how animals taught humans to survive, of ancestors braving winters even harsher than this, of trickster figures who made mistakes so listeners would not repeat them. Each story was another layer of insulation against despair. Here's a detail that feels especially vivid. Many traditions reserve certain stories only for winter. Some tales were too powerful to be spoken during warm months when the world was alive with activity. Only in the hush of snow, when people gathered close around flames, could those words be safely shared. Imagine the anticipation knowing that tonight you would hear a story forbidden just weeks earlier, a tale that could only exist in winter's embrace. The sensory experience is rich. Fire pops gently, sparks rising toward the teepee smoke hole. The storyteller's voice shifts in rhythm, sometimes hushed, sometimes booming. Children press close, eyes wide, their faces glowing in the flickering light. Adults, though they've heard the tale 100 times, still lean in, comforted by its familiarity. The smell of woodsome smoke thickens. The hides overhead glow orange, and the night outside seems to vanish entirely. Researchers continue to debate how literal these stories were meant to be. Some scholars argue they were purely symbolic, myth, and metaphor. Others point to them as coded histories, lessons wrapped in narrative. The truth is likely both fact and fable intertwined. What is beyond question is that storytelling served survival. Fear melts when laughter comes. Anxiety eases when wisdom whispers in your ear. Sleep arrives faster when the mind is soothed by narrative rhythm. And here's a quirky observation from early visitors. Some storytellers used props, shadows cast on hide walls, carved figures held up in firelight, even sound effects made with rattles or whistles. Imagine lying in your bedding and watching a wolf-esque shadow flicker across the tippy wall as the story of a great hunt unfolds. You smile despite the cold, drawn into the tale until fear of frost fades into imagination. The textures of this ritual stay with you. The warmth of another's body pressed to yours as you lean in to listen. The rough feel of a hide beneath your fingers as you trace patterns. Absent-mindedly, the rhythm of voice, the cadence, steady as a heartbeat. Story becomes more than words. It, be, comes. Sensation. A multi-layered experience that wraps you completely. Emotionally, fireside stories worked like medicine. They reminded people of who they were, what they valued, and how they belonged to one another. Children learned courage. Adults remembered patience. Elders affirmed wisdom. You imagine drifting into sleep as the storyteller's voice lowers to a whisper, the tale closing with a moral that lingers in your dreams. The cold outside is unchanged, but inside your heart is warmed. And there's another layer. Some stories warn directly about winter's dangers, the spirits of frost punishing laziness, the animals teaching proper respect for fire, the ancestors urging vigilance. To hear these tales at night wasn't simply entertainment. It was survival instruction coded into myth. If you wanted to live, you listened. Modern parallels shine clearly. Bedtime stories for children today still function this way, easing fear, giving structure to night, lulling minds toward rest. You may not depend on them for survival, but the principle is identical. Words calm, words warm, words carry you into safer dreams, and sometimes laughter cut through the solemnity. Trickster tales, coyote, raven, hare were favorites on cold nights. Their foolish antics, provoking giggles from even the weary. Imagine a family shivering, then suddenly bursting into laughter as the trickster burns his tail or outsmarts himself. That laughter wasn't frivolous. It was survival, sparking warmth from within when no firewood remained. As you lie under your hides now, you hear the last notes of a story, fading into silence. The fire pops, the storyteller sigh, and the camp drifts toward slumber, held safe not only by hides and heat, but by words. And you realize warmth was also sustained by ritual song, by chants that stitched the night together in harmony. That melody, half lie, half prayer, will be your next discovery, carrying you deeper into the heart of winter survival. The storyteller's voice fades in silence, folds itself around the camp. Yet in that hush, another sound begins to rise, a hum, low and steady. At first, no more than a vibration in the chest. Soon it grows into melody, layered by voices of men and women alike, drifting into the cold night like smoke. These are songs not merely for ceremony, but for comfort, rhythm, and warmth. Music itself became a blanket, softening the edges of winter. Ethnographers have long noted that song was woven into nightly life across countless native nations. Some chants called to ancestors, others honored animals, while still others functioned simply as labis. These weren't performances, as you might imagine today. They were living currents, flowing through shelters and tones that steadied hearts and bodies. Imagine yourself lying under hides, the fire glowing low, and a voice humming above you, deep, resonant, rising and falling until your breath unconsciously syncs with it. Sleep pulls you closer with each note. One striking practice recorded by early visitors was the communal night song. Entire families or small bands would join in unison, their voices not perfectly tuned, but perfectly together. The sound filled the tip of your lodge, reverberating against walls, creating a warmth that was not physical, but palpable. Even without understanding the words, you would feel it, the pulse of unity humming against your ribs. And here's a curious, almost playful detail. Children often learn to drum by tapping on whatever lay nearby: stone, hide, even the hardier floor. These improvised beats joined the songs, sometimes off rhythm, sometimes clumsy, but always welcome. You can imagine the laughter as a child's small hand added its own voice, the irregular thumps transforming the solemn chant into something more tender, more alive. The sensory experience is layered. The fire crackles gently. Dogs sigh in their sleep. But above it all, the song floats, vibrating in the air. The sound mingles with the smoky smell, with the warmth of bodies pressed close, until you can't separate one from the other. It becomes a tapestry of senses, heat, scent, voice, touch, all weaving together into the night. Researchers still debate whether certain songs were intended solely for ritual, or whether their nightly use blurred boundaries. Some anthropologists argue that sacred songs were carefully restricted, while others point out that many chants doubled as lullabybus or work rhythms. The evidence suggests the spectrum songs shifted roles, carrying both the weight of ceremony and the simplicity of comfort. What is not debated is their effect. Song soothed, steadied, warmed. Picture a winter evening inside a bark lodge. The wind rattles the walls, Snow creeps in at the edges. A mother begins humming softly, rocking a child. The melody drifts outward, and soon another voice joins, then another. Before long, the entire family hums together, not loudly, but insistently, as though they are weaving sound into insulation.